Chapter 76. The leech with a shattered skull fell to the ground without a sound, dead. The red and white sticky liquid splattered all over Yuvalgin's back, making him feel extremely disgusted. However, Shizuku was meticulous. As soon as she noticed Yuvalgin's clothes were dirty, she immediately adjusted her blinky. The vacuum-like conjured creature went to work at full speed, sucking up all the bloodstains from Yuvalgin's body. After cleaning off the blood, Shizuku looked at his back expressionlessly and said, "Your clothes are clean now. Next, I'll help you extract the poison from your body." She pointed the vacuum at the place where rabid dog's teeth had bitten into Yuvalgin's neck. The suction began again, drawing out all the toxins, both those in Yuvalgin's system and the venom still lingering in rabid dog's own body. From afar, Tianming watched Shizuku's ability in action and couldn't help feeling envious. If only he had an ability like that, one that controlled space and matter. Unfortunately, he was born to be a fighter. Abilities that bent space, time, or rules were not in the cards for him. Once the poison had been removed, Yuvalgin's eyes regained their sharpness. The dizziness that had clouded him vanished instantly, and his net surged like a tidal wave. Rabid dog, unable to withstand the backlash of that fierce aura, released his grip. Yuvalgin retaliated immediately, clamping his own jaws onto rabid dog's throat. With a terrifying crunch, he crushed it, flipping the title of Mad Dog back on his attacker. Next, Yuvalgin turned to Porcupine, who had pierced his right hand with his body hair. Letting out a deafening roar, he shattered Porcupine's eardrums, causing him to bleed from every orifice. The iron-like hairs softened and fell away. Porcupine collapsed, dead. A short distance away, Shizuku covered her ears, unimpressed. "Why are you yelling all of a sudden?" Yuvalgin ignored her. He'd been utterly humiliated today. He had declared he would take down the shadow beasts by himself, only to almost die at their hands. The memory of that shame ignited a new rage in him. His aura exploded as violent energy surged toward his right fist. Underground, Earthworm was already trying to flee. He had realized that the troop's strength was beyond anything he could deal with. Now that his comrades had fallen, there was no way he could win alone. But just as he prepared to escape through the earth, Yuvalgin grabbed his wrist and unleashed his full power downward. A massive crater, 100 meters in diameter, erupted from the ground, the impact shaking the area for miles. Even Tianming and the others, hidden kilometers away, felt the blast's shockwave. Phaeton and Shanark, watching from afar, were completely shaken. The strength gap was so staggering they couldn't even think of being hostile toward the phantom troop anymore. All they wanted was to return to the car and drive away from this nightmare. However, they suddenly noticed that Kurapika's nen was flaring wildly, and he had begun walking toward the battlefield, clearly intending to confront the troop. Panicked, they tried to stop him, but Kurapika's fury had consumed him. The rage of revenge blinded him. There was only one thought left in his mind: kill the troop and avenge his clan. Just then, Tianming placed a firm hand on Kurapika's shoulder, stopping him like an iron clamp. Kurapika turned and glared at Tianming. "Why are you stopping me?" he growled. Tianming pushed him gently behind and replied calmly, "You should support from the rear. When I grab her, drive off immediately." Without another word, he stepped forward. Behind him, Kurapika took deep breaths, slowly calming down. He realized he had nearly acted on impulse. Yuvalgin, even after being ambushed, was still at full strength. Charging in now would have been suicide. Kurapika quickly turned to Phaeton and Shanark. "Get the car ready. Wait for Tianming's return and leave as soon as he gets in." "Understood." Back at the crater, Yuvalgin stood in the middle of the devastation. His throat was torn, making him look like a monster from a horror story. Surrounded by the corpses of the shadow beasts, he let out a triumphant, bone-shaking roar. "You bastards! I'm going to kill every last one of you." The rest of the troop approached, covering their ears. Shanark sighed. "You were sloppy today. If Shizuku hadn't helped, you'd be a corpse." It was true. Without Shizuku's intervention, Yuvalgin would have died the moment the leech injected him with that brain-eating parasite. Shizuku's blinky could only absorb non-living matter, and the worm was alive. Had she not acted quickly, it would have been too late. I got careless, Uvogin grumbled. But that won't happen again. Phaeton glanced over the carnage and smirked. So these are the famous shadow beasts? Looks like 6 more are still hiding. If we can draw them out, maybe they'll lead us to the auction treasure. Next time, don't anyone try to interfere, Uvogin growled. Those 6 are mine. No one took his words seriously. Without Shizuku, he'd be dead meat. They weren't about to trust him solo again. Suddenly, both Uvogin and Phaeton turned sharply. Their fists and Phaeton's umbrella blade lashed out toward Shizuku's back. But they were too late. Shizuku had already fainted, and someone snatched her away in the blink of an eye, vanishing into the sky. A figure darted across the air itself, Tianming, carrying the unconscious Shizuku. Shocked, Maki narrowed her eyes. She recognized him instantly. Her hand flashed as a thin steel needle, laced with nen thread, shot into Shizuku's body. If the thread remained undetected, she could trace it and locate Shizuku's exact position no matter how far she fled. But seconds later, her thread was yanked out. She'd been discovered, and she completely lost track of Shizuku. Chapter 77. Phaegia was practically flooring the accelerator. Her foot might as well have gone through the car. It was the first time she had ever driven this fast, and in the back of her mind, she wished she had 2 rocket boosters strapped to the rear bumper to launch them into the air. Through the rearview mirror, she noticed a black car tailing them closely. It had been following them for a while, and it was gaining speed fast. She remembered clearly, the original driver of that vehicle had been smashed to a pulp by Uvogin. That meant whoever was now behind the wheel wasn't from the Mafia, it had to be a member of the Phantom Troop. Phaegia's hands began to tremble on the steering wheel. Her voice wavered as she looked at Kurapika in the back seat. "Where are we going?" Kurapika didn't answer. He was seated on the left side of the back row, eyes fixed on the unconscious Shizuku next to him. Behind his contact lenses, his crimson eyes flickered with dangerous light. Tianming didn't pay attention to Kurapika's rising aura. He knew this guy was rational. Despite the bloodlust, he wouldn't act recklessly. Not yet. Tianming, meanwhile, wore a grin on his face. Holding this important hostage was exactly what he needed for the next step in his plan. Shizuku's spatial type Nen was too valuable to the troop, their operations relied heavily on her. As a functional member, her worth far exceeded that of front-line fighters like Uvogin or Nobunaga. At the same time, Tianming sensed faint presences ahead on the road. It seemed more of the shadow beasts had arrived. Perfect. Let them serve as cannon fodder to stall the troop. In the black car behind, Shanark was driving with Maki in the passenger seat, while Nobunaga and Phaeton sat in the back. Shanark was tense. The guy who attacked us, he was incredibly fast. Phaeton, did you see him clearly? Phaeton's voice was cold. Saw enough. Same guy who was staring at us back at the auction. Shanark nodded slowly, piecing it together. If the boss is right, then that guy might not have leaked our plan to the Mafia. But he's definitely got his eyes on us, probably a bounty hunter. He went straight for Shizuku, which means he knew her ability is crucial to our team. Everyone seemed to agree. Phaeton scoffed. There were Mafia agents who saw him. We can question them later, figure out who this guy is. At that moment, Maki spoke. We should ask Hisoka. That caught everyone's attention. The others turned toward her just as a shadow flashed past them. A man in sunglasses holding a red cloth bag suddenly landed on their car's hood, then threw the bag onto the windshield, instantly blocking their view. The 4 troop members leaped out of the car, just in time. As soon as they were clear, the entire vehicle disappeared, replaced by a small pouch no bigger than a thumb on the ground. Maki narrowed her eyes. So, you've got a spatial Nen ability like Shizuku's. That confirms it, you're the Shadow Beast who moved all the auction treasures. The Shadow Beast leader, Al, didn't reply. Then 5 other figures appeared from all directions. These were the remaining Shadow Beasts, each with strange animalistic traits blended into their humanoid forms. Earthworm's squad got wiped out. The troop's reputation really wasn't exaggerated, one of them muttered. Phaeton cracked his neck, itching to fight. Nobunaga unsheathed his sword. The battle was ready to begin. Just then, a black car sped into the scene. The roof shattered as Uvogin burst out of it, landing with a thunderous crash. He grinned ferociously. "You must be the last of the shadow beasts. You're all going to die today." Maki sighed. Shanark warned, "Don't kill the one with the red bundle. We need to interrogate him, find out where he hid the treasures." But Uvogin was already charging in like a rabid beast. 15 minutes later. The road looked like it had been struck by missiles, pockmarked with craters, rubble, and debris. Blood and body parts were strewn everywhere. Uvogin stood in the center, drenched in gore, holding Owl by the collar. The other shadow beasts were obliterated, none of them even had a complete corpse left behind. This is what I call a real fight. Now that was fun. Uvogin tossed the unconscious Owl at Phaeton's feet and laughed. "Here, you like interrogations, don't you? He's all yours, make him talk." Phaeton gave a cold snort. He was annoyed. Torture was his specialty, and when Uvogin reduced everything to raw muscle, it took all the fun out of it. As Uvogin, Franklin, Shanark, Maki, Nobunaga, and Phaeton began investigating the area for the missing treasure, Tianming and his group, carrying Shizuku, arrived at an unfinished building in southern York-Nu. They parked in the shadows and entered one of the buildings. Fei-Jia lowered her voice and asked Tianming, "You caught one of the troop. Why not hand her over to the Mafia for the bounty? Why bring us here?" Melody and Kurapika were curious too. Tianming had said his goal was to turn in the troop for a reward. So, what was he planning now? Tianming didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called Hanzo. "Hey, I've captured a troop member. Come to the toll building I brought you to last time. Bring the others." Once the call ended, Tianming turned to Kurapika with a grin. "You think I'd stop after just catching one? No. My goal is to take out the entire Phantom troop, wipe them out completely." Fei-Jia's jaw dropped. Melody, who had been listening closely to Tianming's heartbeat, could tell he wasn't lying. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Kurapika frowned deeply. "Tianming, I appreciate you helping with my revenge, but this is my fight. You don't have to." "Hold up. Who said I was doing this for you?" Tianming interrupted. "I'm hunting the troop for my own reasons, money, training my team. And because I feel like it. You wanna tag along? Fine. If not, go home and cuddle with your violin girl." Chapter 78. Although he was irritated by Tianming's blunt attitude, Kurapika was still moved by his proposal. The fact that Tianming dared to propose hunting the Phantom troop meant he had strong confidence in his team's power. Kurapika had originally planned to take revenge alone, but if he could join a reliable team, it would increase his chances of success and ease some of the pressure. After a moment of thought, Kurapika agreed to join Tianming's joint task force, on one condition: he needed to first see the strength of Tianming's team. If he couldn't trust them to have his back, there was no way he'd fight alongside them. Tianming agreed without hesitation. After all, Gon and the others had been personally trained by him, and they already had a strong bond. Their coordination would naturally be better than any random group. With that, the two quickly reached a consensus about forming a Phantom troop hunting team. Meanwhile, Phaeton and Shanark, who had been quietly listening nearby, felt dizzy with disbelief. They were still haunted by the fear of facing the Phantom troop, and now, Tianming was talking about hunting down the entire group like it was no big deal. It left them utterly overwhelmed. Tianming and Kurapika finally remembered the two bystanders standing awkwardly to the side. Tianming turned to them and said, "You two can head back. Kurapika will return to your family once he's done here." Upon hearing this, Phaeton tugged at Melody's sleeve and signaled her to leave. Melody hesitated, but after listening to Kurapika's calm heartbeat, she nodded and gave him a few last instructions before following Phaeton out of the building. Time passed. Roughly 20 minutes later, a van pulled up in the distance and stopped near the abandoned building. A group of familiar faces jumped out and dashed up the stairs. Gon was the first to burst into the room. The moment he spotted Kurapika, he sprinted over and threw his arms around him. "It's been so long, Kurapika. I really missed you." Though it had only been half a year, it somehow felt like a lifetime. Kurapika froze in surprise. He hadn't expected the team Tianming spoke of to include Gon and the others. Looking around the room, he was shocked to see so many familiar faces: Leorio, Gon, Killua, even Boudreaux. Only the tall man with long white hair was unfamiliar. Once Gon calmed down, he looked up and asked curiously, "Are you really the people Tianming talked about, the ones going to hunt the Phantom Troop with him?" Gon nodded seriously. "That's right. When we heard the Phantom Troop was involved, we decided to help. We came to join the hunt." Kurapika lowered his head. His expression was hidden from view. After a few moments of silence, he lifted his gaze. His eyes were filled with determination. "I disagree." The whole room fell into stunned silence. Leorio stepped forward, grabbed Kurapika by the collar, and shouted, "What the hell are you talking about? Why would you say that now?" Kurapika replied firmly, "Going against the Phantom Troop isn't a joke. They're powerful and cruel. You'd have no chance of winning." Leorio's grip tightened. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about whether you see us as your friends. Back during the Hunter exam, I told you, if you ever went after the Phantom Troop, I'd have your back. Gon and Killua feel the same. But when we called you after arriving in Yorknu, you ignored us. You never planned on relying on us. Do you know how worried Gon was about you?" The room went silent again. Tianming stepped forward and gently tapped Leorio's arm, signaling him to calm down. Then he turned to Kurapika. "Before Gon and the others got here, you had no problem working with me. Now that they're involved, you're suddenly against the plan. It sounds like you just don't trust their strength." Kurapika didn't respond, but silence was an answer in itself. It was clear, he didn't believe Gon and the others were strong enough. He feared they would only die if they got involved. Leorio's temper flared again. "You underestimate us too much. We've all been training Nen since the exam. We even trained under the Hunter Association's Nen instructors after running from Killua's brother. We're not the same people we were 6 months ago." Kurapika looked up and noticed that not just Leorio, but Gon and Killua too were visibly upset. Realizing he owed them an explanation, he began to speak. "In the past 6 months, I completed my Nen ability and imposed strict conditions and restrictions on it." He explained his judgment chain, the chain on his middle finger that forces any member of the Phantom Troop into Zetsu, absolute, rendering them unable to use Nen. It allowed him to kill them like a regular person. But the power came at a cost. If he used the chain on anyone outside the Phantom Troop, the blade hidden near his heart would pierce it and kill him instantly. Killua finally understood. He smirked. "No wonder you're so confident. You've got an Nen ability tailor-made to kill the Phantom Troop." Then he crossed his arms and added, "But you're still wrong about us. Sure, we didn't swear any oaths like you, but we've trained hard. We're not pushovers. Even if we don't have abilities designed to kill the Phantom Troop, we're not going down easy." Kurapika shook his head. "You still don't understand the true power of the troop. And don't be fooled by how Tianming describes them. He's so strong that he could probably solo any of them. That's why you're underestimating them. You won't truly understand the difference in strength until you face them yourself." Killua opened his mouth to retort, but at that moment, Kurapika's phone rang. He glanced at it and said, "Go back, all of you. I won't agree to let you take on the troop." With that, he turned and walked away, looking for a quiet place to take the call. He already knew who it was. Hisoka. And if Gon and the others couldn't fight the Phantom Troop, perhaps it was time to let Hisoka, the unpredictable wildcard, play his part. Chapter 79. Feeling the violent energy surge behind him like a wave, Kurapika instinctively rolled forward, landing in a half-squat facing the direction the energy came from. His first reaction was to assume that the previously captured member of the Phantom Troop had regained consciousness and launched a surprise attack. However, once he turned and prepared to counter, he was shocked to find that the one who had released the Nen wasn't a troop member, it was Gon. After confirming there was no danger, he stood up and stared at Gon in disbelief. Even now, he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that such powerful aura had come from him. Although he had only been training in Nen for half a year, Kurapika was confident that his progress far outstripped that of Gon and the others from the same time period. Over the past 6 months, he had trained like a madman, relentlessly and under extreme conditions, going so far as to impose oaths and restrictions to enhance his Nen abilities. In his mind, there was no way Gon and the others, who trained in a more standard fashion, could have caught up. And yet, the sheer volume of aura Gon had just unleashed made Kurapika doubt everything. How could his aura grow this much in less than half a year? From what Kurapika could sense, Gon's aura was nearly on par with that of Uvogin, the troop member they'd encountered earlier. Killua, standing beside Gon, sighed and said with exasperation, as expected, Gon's method is the most straightforward. You won't understand how strong we've become unless you feel it for yourself. As he finished speaking, Killua released his own Nen. It was slightly weaker than Gon's but still comparable. In a real fight, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage at all. Seeing them act, Basho followed suit. Basho and Kurapika weren't acquainted, but he understood that this was a good way to demonstrate his strength and ease any doubts, so he too released his Nen. Tianming, watching the others, hesitated briefly before releasing his aura as well. The fierce Nen clashed and echoed between the unfinished buildings like violent currents. The combined pressure from the 5 was like 5 geysers slamming into Kurapika's body. He was forced to stagger backward, only regaining his footing after unleashing all of his own aura and entering a tense state to stabilize himself. Feeling that it was enough, Tianming patted Gon on the shoulder. Then, he was the first to withdraw his aura. One by one, the others followed suit, and soon the entire building fell into silence, as though the storm had never happened. Kurapika gasped heavily, having never faced so many seasoned Nen users releasing their aura in unison. It took him quite a while to recover. Once he did, he didn't speak immediately but glanced over at Leorio, who was clinging to a nearby concrete pillar with a grin on his face. "And yours?" Kurapika asked. Leorio blinked innocently. "My what?" "Your aura. I already released it." "You did?" "I didn't feel anything. If I hadn't been holding on, I'd have been blown away." Kurapika. In the end, Kurapika agreed to join the temporary team that had formed to take down the Phantom Troop. He reviewed the information on the troop that Tianming had pulled from Leorio's briefcase. After reading through it, he took a deep breath. The document described the abilities of each troop member in detail. To Kurapika, it felt as though the troop had no more secrets left. With intel this complete, it was as if their fate was sealed. As he was deep in thought, running through potential strategies in his mind, Tianming interrupted him. "Your phone rang earlier, didn't it? Was it Hisoka?" That jolted Kurapika's memory. He hadn't hidden anything from the others, he'd openly admitted that he was working with Hisoka. As long as Hisoka provided information about the troop members, Kurapika would help him secure a chance to fight Krallo, the troop leader. But now that Tianming had handed over such comprehensive data, Hisoka's role was less important. Kurapika didn't feel the need to return the call, or even acknowledge it. Still, Tianming believed there was value in continuing to work with Hisoka. After all, he could serve as an early warning system for the troops' movements. If anything went wrong, they'd know sooner rather than later. At Tianming's suggestion, Kurapika called Hisoka back. As soon as the call connected, Hisoka spoke first. "I just heard someone kidnapped number 8. Is that girl with you?" Kurapika glanced at Tianming, silently asking how to respond. Tianming took the phone and said, "Shizuku is indeed with me. What do you want with her?" Hearing Tianming's voice, Hisoka fell silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Did you personally take Shizuku?" "That's right. Has any troop member discovered your identity?" Tianming paused. "They didn't see my face, but they likely saw my clothes. I ran into them once at the auction. They probably already know what I look like." After that, Tianming noticed that Hisoka sounded slightly disappointed. "If I'm not mistaken," Hisoka said, "they've likely guessed our relationship." After they captured the Shadow Beast leader, Uvogin and the others didn't immediately look for Shizuku. Instead, they brought the Shadow Beast leader back to their temporary base. The reason they didn't chase you is probably because they've figured out that we're working together. Lucky for me, I took the initiative to request a leave of absence from Kurolo. If they had bumped into me, I wouldn't have gotten out alive. Hisoka sounded more disappointed than afraid, like he regretted not being able to continue playing his Twisted Traitor game. After a long silence, Tianming finally spoke again. Can you just spell out our relationship already? You're making it sound like we're having an affair. Enough with the ambiguity. There was a beat of silence. Then Hisoka let out a creepy laugh and said, "Of course, we're just good friends. But if you want to be lovers, I wouldn't mind giving you a chance. I swear I'm going to slap you." Enough nonsense. I'll give you two choices. 1. Pack your things and leave Ukexen. Go into hiding for a while. The next time you hear about the Phantom Troop, it'll be news of their annihilation. 2. Come meet me now. I have something I need you to deliver to the troop. I promise they won't kill you after you hand it over. Chapter 80. Hisoka narrowed his eyes, his tongue flicking out to lick his lower lip in excitement. He had his suspicions about Tianming and Kurapika's intentions, but when he heard them openly say they wanted to destroy the Phantom Troop, Hisoka couldn't help but tremble with excitement. He hadn't expected these two to be playing such a bold game, but this kind of thing was just his style. Exciting. On the other end of the call, Tianming asked, "There's no third option? If possible, I'd actually like to join you." "No." Tianming's reply was firm. He didn't explain why, but Hisoka could probably guess. It was a matter of trust. Clearly, they still didn't fully trust him, and that disappointed him. He and Tianming had known each other for a long time, yet Tianming remained this cautious. With a sigh, Hisoka replied dully, "Fine, fine. I'll take the second option. I'll come to you right now." Tianming gave him an address, a hidden spot he had scouted out earlier in Ukexen City. After that, he hung up and tossed the phone back to Kurapika. Once the arrangements with Hisoka were made, Tianming turned to the others and gave instructions. "Leorio, drive out now and buy a VCR and a recorder." Leorio's face darkened. "Where am I supposed to find that stuff at this hour?" Fortunately, Kurapika pulled some strings using the Nostrade family's network and managed to drag the owner of a large electronics store out of bed. They got the equipment Tianming needed, and Leorio just had to go pick it up. Next, Tianming handed a script to Gon and Killua. After reading it, the two boys went silent. Gon's face was filled with deep embarrassment, while Killua grinned with a mischievous glint in his eye. Once everyone had their tasks, Tianming looked toward Shizuku, who had been pretending to sleep, and said calmly, "You can stop pretending. I noticed you were awake a long time ago." Everyone turned in surprise toward the sofa where Shizuku lay. The supposedly unconscious Shizuku sat upright immediately, posture straight like a model student. If one didn't know her background, it would be hard to imagine that this calm, mild-looking girl was a Class A wanted criminal who could kill without blinking and clean up the scene with a vacuum cleaner. Truthfully, Shizuku had woken up the moment Tianming and the others had unleashed their nen earlier. After sensing the overwhelming power around her, she dared not make a move. Even while pretending to sleep, she had been tense and alert. Unfortunately, it hadn't worked, she'd still been exposed. Now there was no way out. She looked at Tianming with a blank expression and said, "I know your plan to go after the troop. I suggest you kill me now. Otherwise, I will escape and report back to the leader." Her tone was flat and unafraid. She spoke like someone who had seen death too many times to fear it anymore. Tianming hesitated. His original plan had been to use Shizuku as bait to lure out several troop members and then pick them off one by one. But Hisoka's sudden contact had disrupted everything. The plan had changed. His bait was now a liability. He glanced at the others, looking for suggestions. Surprisingly, Basho, who usually kept his thoughts to himself, stepped forward. He stood in front of Tianming and said seriously, "Tianming, I know what's on your mind. You spend your days training or hanging out with guys. You must be starving for female company, right? Look, this girl, Shizuku, sure, she's with the troupe, but she's got a good face, a great figure. Perfect to fill that lonely void in your heart. Besides, there's still time before you meet Hisoka. We can wait for you, no problem, bro. Time can pause for this. Before he could finish, Tianming, whose face had already turned black with rage, grabbed Basho by the shoulders, slammed him to the ground, and pinned him with such force that Basho's face twisted in pain. Tianming snarled through clenched teeth, I thought you were the serious type, but even you are making fun of me now? Is it because I've been too easygoing that you all think I'm a joke? He was fed up. Everyone who knew him seemed to love teasing him. First it was Leorio with his big mouth. Then Gon and Killua got bold. Even Kurapika, who normally kept his cool, occasionally took jabs at him. Now even Basho, with his big eyes and serious face, was joining in. I'm an enhancer. Brutal and violent by nature. If you guys push me too far, I'll flatten you into the floor. Believe that. He turned his glare toward Badoro, who immediately looked away and muttered under his breath, Why are you staring at me? I didn't do anything. But deep down, Badoro was nervous. When Basho had made that crack, he had snickered. Now he was seriously worried Tianming would come for him next. In the midst of this ridiculous atmosphere, Kurapika stepped forward, bringing with him a wave of icy killing intent. The cold malice rolling off him was enough to make Shizuku's skin crawl. Everyone immediately quieted down and turned their attention toward him. Kurapika approached Shizuku. Without warning, he extended the chain wrapped around his middle finger and bound her tightly. The chain jail instantly suppressed all of Shizuku's nen, turning her from a skilled fighter into an ordinary person with no aura. The chains tightened, crushing her limbs with overwhelming pressure. Even someone as stoic as Shizuku couldn't maintain a calm expression. Pain flickered across her face. Killua and Gon, who had been rehearsing lines in the corner, looked up. Was Kurapika planning to execute every troupe member? Kurapika asked coldly, When did you join the troupe? Were you involved in the massacre of the Kurta clan 5 years ago? Each word he spoke was laced with anger, and the force of his chains increased with every syllable, as though he was ready to crush her into a pulp. Despite the pain, Shizuku's voice didn't waver. I forgot. Kurapika exploded with fury. He yanked out his red contact lenses and shouted, Forgot? You slaughtered so many innocent Kurta people, and now you say you've forgotten? Tianming intervened with a sigh. She really might have forgotten. From what I've heard, Shizuku's memory is terrible. She probably doesn't even remember me, and I met her at the auction just a while ago. Besides, I believe she only joined the troupe 2 or 3 years ago. Killua's father took out the previous number 8 member, and she replaced them. That was less than 3 years ago. She shouldn't have been part of the Kurta massacre. Kurapika frowns. The righteous fury that had just surged through him deflated. His hatred had been directed at the murderers who wiped out his clan. As for the rest of the troupe, he didn't need to kill every last one of them. If Shizuku had nothing to do with the tragedy, he no longer had a reason to kill her. Chapter 81. A sharp chain pierced into Shizuku's chest, sliding beneath the skin and resting its blade tip against her heart. This is my judgment chain, Kurapika said coldly. Once I set the rules, you must follow them. If you break even one, it will pierce your heart, and you'll die instantly. After speaking, Kurapika withdrew the chain from his middle finger. Now that he had already set the chain of rules with his little finger, there was no need to continue binding her with the other. Shizuku lowered her head slightly, reached a hand into her collar, and touched the spot where the chain had entered. Tianming and the others immediately blushed and turned their heads away, thinking Shizuku had no shame. Why was she checking the wound in public like that? As she pressed her skin, there was no external injury, but she could clearly feel something sharp still embedded in her heart. Kurapika continued, the rule I've imposed is, no use of nen. If this chain detects even a trace of nen activity from you, it will pierce your heart on the spot. If you want to stay alive, don't even think about doing anything reckless. Shizuku calmly adjusted her clothes and nodded. Whatever she was really thinking, Only she knew. Shortly afterward, Leorio returned with the recording equipment. Tianming called Gon and Killua over and began setting up to record. About an hour later, Tianming arrived alone at the location where he had arranged to meet Hisoka. He first approached the counter and ordered 2 bubble milk teas, then brought one to the table where Hisoka was already seated and set it down in front of him. Hisoka picked up the drink, took a sip, then leaned back lazily in his chair with a smirk. "Didn't expect you to pick a bubble tea shop. Aren't you worried about being seen by the troupe? Or getting caught on camera?" Tianming replied casually, "We're already preparing for a direct clash with the troupe. They already know you and I are connected, so what's the point of hiding anymore?" Hisoka shrugged, apparently satisfied with that answer, and shifted the conversation to the real reason they were meeting. "You said earlier you wanted me to bring something to the troupe. I'm curious, what is it?" Without any dramatics, Tianming pulled a videotape from his pocket. It was an old-school VHS tape, rectangular and black like a brick. The tape was inside a box. Tianming pushed it across the table. "This is it. Make sure Krillou watches it in person. I don't care if the others see it or not, but he must." Hisoka didn't immediately take the box. Instead, he rested his chin on his hand, staring at the tape with interest. After a long pause, he looked back at Tianming, puzzled. "There's no Nenora on this at all. How did you manage such strong nin?" To be honest, the tape had really caught Hisoka off guard. It wasn't unusual to infuse items with nen. Greed Island, for instance, was a nen-based game. But this tape? Even after using Gyo and staring at it intensely, he couldn't detect a hint of nen. If Tianming had someone capable of hiding nen this perfectly, that person had to be extremely skilled. Tianming blinked innocently. Then burst into laughter, leaving Hisoka even more confused. Still chuckling, Tianming explained, "You're overthinking it. It's just a regular videotape. I didn't embed any nen into it, so of course you can't sense anything." "Then why are you insisting Krillou has to watch it?" "I have my reasons. When you give it to him, tell him that if he wants to kill us or rescue Shizuku, he must watch this tape with the rest of the troupe. Otherwise, even if Pakunoda erases your memory, they still won't be able to find me." Hisoka playfully pointed at the tape. "Can I watch it first?" Tianming shook his head, smiling. "I'd advise against it. If you do, and Pakunoda erases your memory, the tape won't have the desired effect anymore. All I'll tell you is this tape contains some happy memories from my childhood. If I remember right, the troupe members have some of their own happy childhood memories recorded on the tape too." As he spoke, a nostalgic expression came over Tianming's face. Then he looked Hisoka directly in the eyes, his smile especially bright. "Pakunoda, if you're about to read his memory, do you remember your childhood tape? Show this one to Krillou. Watch it together with the others." Seeing Tianming's look, Hisoka smirked. That last line clearly wasn't for him, it was a message meant for Pakunoda. Hisoka didn't ask anything more. He closed the tape box, picked it up, and got ready to leave. He'd been unsure whether he wanted to return to the troupe, but Tianming's cryptic behavior had piqued his curiosity. What was this guy plotting? What was really on that tape? He didn't take a cab or drive. He walked the entire way toward the Phantom Troop's temporary base in Ukixen. The streets grew darker, traffic thinned, and eventually, he left the city altogether, entering the wilderness. This was an abandoned underground shelter on the north side of Ukixen. Years ago, the city's economic center had shifted south, leaving this once central shelter deserted and forgotten in the suburbs. He entered through a hidden entrance, walking along pitch-black corridor. Eventually, candlelight began to flicker in the distance. Seated at a table near a dancing flame was a handsome man with slicked back hair and an inverted cross tattooed on his forehead. Krillou Lucifer sat quietly on a worn sofa, reading a book. The candlelight cast his face in shifting shadow. Hisoka stepped into the room. Pakunoda, Kortopi, Phaeton, and Finks were all gathered inside. Every one of them turned their eyes toward him. Krillou was the first to speak. "All done?" Hisoka nodded casually. "It's done. Everything went smoother than expected. But before anyone could reply, a rough voice echoed from behind. "Now that you're done, it's our turn." Hisoka's eyes narrowed as he tilted his head slightly to the side. From the shadows behind him emerged Uvogin, wearing a short-sleeved white shirt, his face filled with menace. And he wasn't alone. Franklin, Shanark, Maki, Phaeton, and the rest, those who had been working with Uvogin earlier, all stepped out from the darkness, surrounding him. Just as Uvogin raised his massive fist, preparing to strike, Krillov, still calmly seated, lifted his eyes and spoke. Chapter 82. Uvogin retracted his raised fist, clearly displeased, glaring at Hisoka with killing intent. If Hisoka gave even a slightly unsatisfactory answer, he'd be dead in the next second. Surrounded by the tense and aggressive members of the Phantom Troop, Hisoka didn't flinch. Instead, he shrugged casually and said with a playful smirk, "I really don't know what you want me to say. You all surround me so fiercely, of course I'm trembling in fear." Uvogin scowled but didn't move. Maki stepped forward with a frosty glare and questioned him directly. "You know the guy named Zhao Tianming, right? He's the one who kidnapped Shizuku. Did you leak information about the troop to him?" The moment she spoke, every eye turned toward Hisoka. The troop members fixed their gazes on him, studying every twitch, every subtle change in his expression. Hisoka didn't hesitate. He smiled and answered honestly, "I didn't leak any information about the troop to Tianming. I also had no idea he was going to kidnap Shizuku. If I had known he was that bold, I might have suggested teaming up with him to kidnap Krillov instead." He said it casually, almost as a joke, but the moment the words left his mouth, they ignited the fury of the entire troop. Krillov wasn't just their leader, he was the soul of the Phantom Troop. For Hisoka to speak about him like that, so flippantly, with zero respect, only further proved to them that Hisoka wasn't truly one of them. Nobunaga drew his katana with a steely glare. Franklin raised his 10 loaded fingers like a monster from hell. Uvogin's aura flared violently, ready to attack at any second. But before they could move, Krillov calmly closed the book he was reading and, with a look, signaled everyone to stand down. Then he turned to Hisoka and smiled faintly. "Oh? So when you said you had something urgent to do, was it to meet with this person, Tianming?" Hisoka licked his lips. Finally, this was the moment he had been waiting for. He leaned back comfortably and replied, "I originally went to meet someone else, but it turned out Tianming was there. So, we ended up having a one-on-one chat." The atmosphere grew tense, ice-cold. If Krillov hadn't been keeping Uvogin and Nobunaga in check, a fight might have already broken out. Krillov's smile shifted, no longer just polite but one of genuine interest. Hisoka was amusing. He liked people like that. "Really? And what did you two talk about? Did he have a message for me?" Krillov asked, his voice still calm. He had already guessed what was happening. With Hisoka's intelligence and composure, it was clear he had expected his ties to Tianming would be exposed. If he still had the nerve to return here, that could only mean one thing: Tianming wanted him to deliver a message. Maybe they were using Shizuku as leverage. Maybe it was bait, a trap to lure them in. Hisoka didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his collar. Nobunaga's eyes narrowed and in a flash, his sword was pressed against Hisoka's neck. "Don't move," he growled. "Relax," Hisoka said smoothly. "Don't get so worked up. It's just a videotape." He slowly pulled out the videotape and waved it lazily in front of them to show it wasn't a threat. Still, no one lowered their guard. Krillov's expression changed slightly at the sight of the tape. He stared at it, then looked at Hisoka. "What is that?" "It's exactly what it looks like, a videotape," Hisoka replied, still toying with it. "Tianming asked me to bring it. He said it doesn't matter if anyone else watches it, but you, Krillov, must see it yourself." Phaeton stepped forward with a scoff. "Obvious trap. Do you take us for fools? If he's targeting just the captain, then this tape's probably tied to some nen ability aimed only at him. You and this Tianming, birds of a feather. Both twisted weirdos." Everyone nodded in agreement. It was too obvious. Who would walk into such a transparent trap? But Krilo waved them off. "Check the tape. Let me see it." Everyone froze in shock. Pakunoda immediately objected. "That thing's clearly a trap. Why would you watch something so dangerous?" Krilo reclined on the sofa, the corners of his mouth curling upward. "It's been a while since I've come across something interesting. Phaeton's right, anyone who's a friend of Hisoka's must be pretty strange. Can I be your friend too, Hisoka?" Hisoka chuckled and handed the tape to Pakunoda. "Haven't we always been friends?" Their eyes locked. A strange vibe hung between them, so thick it made the other troop members uncomfortable. Pakunoda took the tape and scanned it with her nen, checking for any hidden energy. Nothing. It was just a plain, old-school videotape. No nen, no traps. She passed it to the others for further inspection. Nobunaga, a master of N, scanned it thoroughly. Even Shanark went so far as to tear the tape apart and put it back together, but no abnormalities were found. And that was what disturbed them most. The Phantom Troop had survived this long thanks to their hypervigilance. If something looked too clean, that was often a red flag. The more harmless it seemed, the more dangerous it probably was. At last, Pakunoda turned to Krilo and said, "I want to read Hisoka's memory." Krilo considered it, then nodded. "Go ahead." Hisoka didn't resist at all. He let Pakunoda place her hand on his arm. He had nothing to hide anymore. Whatever plans he'd had, well, that was Tianming's problem now. In an instant, Pakunoda's ability activated. Hisoka's memories flooded into her mind. Her power allowed her to read memories, but she didn't have time to sift through his entire life story. She focused on the past year. She saw everything: Hisoka's encounter with Tianming after the Hunter exam, their growing connection, and finally his betrayal and teaming up with Kurapika to go against the troop. When she saw those memories, her jaw clenched and her eyes darkened. Hisoka hadn't leaked their information, no, but he had planned to team up with Kurapika to target the Phantom Troop. That was betrayal, plain and simple. She continued reading until she reached the memory from just over an hour ago, the conversation between Hisoka and Tianming. And then, one particular sentence echoed in her mind. A sentence Tianming had spoken directly to her. Chapter 83. After reading Hisoka's memory, Pakunoda stood frozen in place, her mind momentarily blank, until Krilo's voice brought her back to reality. "What's wrong, Pak? Is there something unusual in Hisoka's memory?" "And no. Nothing like that. I'll tell you everything about Zhao Tianming," she replied after a short pause. Pakunoda took a moment to collect her thoughts before addressing the Phantom Troop. In Hisoka's memory, Tianming's origins were extremely mysterious. The first time they met was during the Hunter exam. Even back then, Tianming was strong enough to fight Hisoka to a draw, before he had even awakened Nen. That alone was enough to capture Hisoka's interest. Later, they crossed paths again at Heaven's Arena. Hisoka had challenged Tianming again, but this time, he was completely overpowered. Tianming had grown to a level that Hisoka described as absurdly powerful. Still, none of this shook the troop. No matter how strong the opponent, he was still just an enhancer. They had countless ways to deal with a powerful beast. But then Pakunoda mentioned that Tianming had deliberately instructed Hisoka to deliver a message to her, and the mood changed. Everyone exchanged glances, then turned toward Krilo. Tianming clearly knew about Pakunoda's Nen ability. That's why he didn't tell Hisoka anything directly useful. He'd prepared a message knowing she would extract it. And based on what he said, it was obvious he knew far more about the troop's past than he should have. His words had touched on something buried deep within their hearts, the memory of Sarasa, their long-lost friend. If she hadn't died, they never would have formed the troop in the first place. They never would have risen to protect Meteor City, or become the notorious strongest criminal organization they were now. Krilo leaned back into the sofa, his expression heavy with emotion. Images from the past swirled through his mind. As he gazed upward, his eyes began to mist. But only for a moment. He quickly collected himself, smiled faintly, and said, "Since the videotape checks out, bring it over. Let's watch." Shanark, who had been holding the tape, nodded. They'd examined it from every angle, disassembled it, scanned it with nen. If something still went wrong, then it was their own fault for being unable to see through it. A TV was wheeled in and hooked up. Once everything was connected, Kurlo sat on the sofa directly facing the screen. He leaned forward slightly, watching with quiet anticipation. The rest of the troop stood on high alert. Nobunaga expanded his N, ready to react to any danger. Hisoka, meanwhile, sat bound and guarded, with Franklin's finger gun pointed at him the entire time. At the first sign of a threat, he'd be turned into Swiss cheese. While they waited, Uvogin sidled up to Pakunoda and asked in a low voice, "Pak, earlier you said that Tianming is probably an enhancer too. How does his power compare to mine?" He clenched his fists excitedly as he spoke. Pakunoda gave him a side glance and said flatly, "Stronger than you." Surprisingly, Uvogin didn't seem disappointed, only more fired up. If such a monster really existed, then he wanted a piece of him. He was already planning that once this tape was over, he'd go find Tianming and settle the matter with his fists. He was going to prove that he, Uvogin, was the strongest enhancer, and the strongest nen user alive. Just then, the screen flickered to life. Kurlo leaned in slightly, eyes focused. 3 figures appeared on the screen, 1 tall adult and 2 boys. Pakunoda and Maki recognized them immediately. The adult man in the black and white martial arts uniform was Zhao Tianming. The 2 boys flanking him were Killua Zoldyck and Gon Freaks. The background was an abandoned construction site. From the layout, Shanark could already tell where it was located. But that wasn't the point. Tianming, standing between Gon and Killua, pointed directly at the screen, as if pointing straight at Kurlo, and shouted, "Captain! You're just a drama queen." Everyone in the room turned to stone. Brains stalled. Systems crashed. Not one person could figure out what the hell was happening. Hisoka, meanwhile, was completely dumbfounded. Had Tianming gone to all this trouble just for this? The video continued. Tianming leaned closer to the camera and shouted again, "You remember what I said? I'm going to curse you out. Right here in Ukexen." He then looked at Gon to his right and signaled him to take over. Gon, red-faced and awkward, took a breath and spoke his lines. "Captain, didn't you bring your dumb teammates to Ukexen? We came to meet you." "Ah!" Tianming interrupted, nudging him with his elbow. "Come on, Gon, go all in." The camera zoomed in on Gon, who stood stiffly in frame, his entire face flushed red. Embarrassed beyond reason, he looked like he'd rather vanish than finish this bit. Raised in a quiet fishing village on Whale Island, Gon had never once cursed at anyone. And now, according to the script, he was supposed to do a backflip while trash-talking? If his aunt ever saw this, he'd have to move to another planet from sheer shame. Killua, watching from the side, sighed. He had told Gon to let him take this part, but Gon had insisted on doing it himself. Now here they were, awkward and stuck. Finally, Killua stepped in. He jumped into the center of the frame, did a clean backflip, and landed smoothly. Then he pointed at the camera with a smirk. "If you dare come to Ukexen, I'll yank all your hair out," he went on, "and you, that big dumb guy, Uvogin, and you, Shorty Phaeton, knew to look like a comedy duo. You're Shuk and Beta, the higher brothers." Killua then held up his pinky finger and grinned. "Best brothers forever." As soon as the tape ended, the underground shelter was silent. No one spoke. They just stood there, stunned. They'd met all kinds of people before, cold-blooded killers, lunatics, geniuses, zealots. But this was new. If this was blackmail, where was the demand? Where was the meeting place? If it was a threat, where was the actual threat? Instead, they had received a professionally delivered roast video, with acting, flips, and a full script. Hisoka had risked life and limb to deliver this. Everyone turned slowly to look at Hisoka. Nobunaga scratched his head. "Is that guy mentally stable?" Hisoka was silent for a beat. Then he replied, "He's all right." Shing! A sudden flash of silver, Nobunaga's blade. The television, the VCR, and the tape were all instantly sliced into tiny pieces. Chapter 84. Seeing Phaeton so furious, Kurlo couldn't help but laugh. Of all things, the one Phaeton hated most was being called short. Clearly, he was truly enraged. If Tianming ever ended up in his hands, he'd be in serious trouble. But honestly, Kurlo found Tianming fascinating. He was unpredictable, bold, and undeniably entertaining. If possible, Kurlo would even like to see him join the Phantom Troupe. Shanark, can you identify where the footage in the video was filmed? Shanark pulled out a map and began to explain. Judging from the background, it looks like an unfinished building. I happened to see it from a hot air balloon once. Based on the structures in the shot, I'd say they filmed it around here. He pointed to a location, exactly where Tianming and the others had recorded the video. Kurlo nodded in acknowledgement. Just as he was about to instruct everyone to move out, he felt a sudden, sharp sense of dread. 3 kilometers above the underground shelter where the Phantom Troupe was located, Tianming hovered in midair, repeatedly stepping on the air as his oar surged upward. Once he'd gathered enough momentum, he twisted midair, head down, feet up, and launched himself like a cannonball. A streak of light tore through the night sky. As he fell, he used geo-reinforced steps to accelerate his descent even further. His right fist began to glow as a massive wave of net surged into it, and his speed grew increasingly terrifying. Then, boom! Tianming slammed into the ground directly above the shelter, punching downward with everything he had. The explosion of Nen lit up the entire sky. Chunks of rock and debris blasted outward, and the resulting shockwave echoed throughout Ukexin City. On a nearby hill, Killua was observing through a telescope. The moment he saw the strike land, his eyes sparkled. "Whoa," he muttered. "That punch was insane. Hope he didn't take out the whole troop. That'd be boring." He put away the telescope. A crackle of electricity wrapped around him, and he vanished in a blink. Back inside the ruins of the underground shelter, the Phantom Troupe began to emerge from the debris, covered in dust and ash. Uvogin, carrying Kortlpi to safety beneath a huge slab of concrete, tossed it aside and roared, "How dare he sneak attack us? If I get my hands on him, I'll crush every bone in his body." Kurlo ignored the outburst and calmly scanned the area. "Where's Hisoka?" The others looked around in confusion. No one had seen him during the chaos. Some speculated he might have been crushed beneath the rubble. But Kurlo shook his head. He didn't believe Hisoka would die that easily. More likely, he'd taken the opportunity to escape, and possibly joined Tianming. Shanark turned to Kurlo and asked cautiously, "What do we do now?" The core of the shelter had collapsed, but its original design included multiple exits, all connected. It had been built this way precisely to allow for easy escape in case of emergencies. Shanark was asking whether they should split up or stick together as they evacuated. Kurlo thought for a moment, then said, "We stay together. If we split up, they'll just pick us off one by one." Everyone nodded and followed him down a single tunnel. The structure had been severely weakened by Tianming's attack. Cracks formed along the walls, and the sound of shifting debris echoed ominously behind them. Maki, leading the way, extended her threads to check for stability as they moved. Uvogin, Phaeton, and the other combat members stayed alert in the rear. Finally, they emerged just before the shelter completely collapsed. Boom! The rear exit gave way just as they cleared it, and a cloud of dust swallowed the troop. Pakunoda, gasping for air, thanked her luck. Among the troop, her combat power ranked low. Without backup, she might not have survived. Just as she was about to step out of the smoke, a sudden gust of wind surged toward her, and a large hand emerged from the dust, clamping around her throat like a viper. She choked, unable to speak. In shock, she looked up. Tianming stood before her, his expression blank, his eyes cold and merciless. Pakunoda's mind reeled. She'd been moving right behind the group. How had Tianming appeared in front of her? Why hadn't the others noticed? Instinctively, she grabbed his arm, and instantly, his memories poured into her like a flood. In my past life, I was a city worker. In my past life, I was an admiral candidate. Hunter x Hunter, Yoshihiro Togashi. So, we're just characters in a manga? Ha. Ridiculous. Crack. Tianming snapped her neck cleanly, then, just to be sure, fired a flying finger gun directly into her forehead. Only after confirming she was truly dead did he relax. To him, Pakunoda had always been the most dangerous troop member. Her ability to read memories with a single touch was just too overpowered. If he could have that power himself, he'd have enough leverage to dominate the entire hunter world. The sound of Pakunoda's death alerted the rest of the troop. They sprang from the smoke in unison, 10 figures landing simultaneously. As the dust cleared, they were met with a chilling sight, Tianming standing calmly, and Pakunoda's lifeless body at his feet. Yuvalgin's eyes turned bloodshot. He was about to charge, but Finks quickly stepped in front of him. "Don't rush. This guy got that close and killed Pak without any of us noticing. He's no pushover." Forced to calm down, Yuvalgin growled, "All the better. The tougher the opponent, the more satisfying the kill. He's mine, don't get in the way." And with that, he charged forward. A torrent of aura erupted from his body like a tidal wave as he sprinted at Tianming. But Tianming only smiled. Activating his Nen mode, he raised his left hand and casually caught Yuvalgin's punch. Boom. The ground beneath Tianming shattered like a spiderweb, but he didn't budge. Yuvalgin's fist felt like it had collided with a mountain of steel. There wasn't a scratch on Tianming. Shock spread across Yuvalgin's face, and across the rest of the troops as well. They knew Yuvalgin's strength. That punch could level buildings. No one had ever taken it full force and remained standing. Yuvalgin grit his teeth and tried to pour in more power, but no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't make Tianming's palm move an inch. Chapter 85. Staring at Yuvalgin, who bared his teeth with a ferocious expression, Tianming let out a sigh. Then, he casually raised his right fist. Boom. The punch slammed straight into Yuvalgin's abdomen. He was sent flying backward, coughing up a mouthful of bile midair. He rolled across the ground for dozens of meters, still unable to dissipate the force behind the hit. Seeing this, Finks quickly moved to intercept him, planting his foot firmly and bracing for the impact. He aimed a heavy kick at Yuvalgin to stop his tumble. But the moment Finks' foot made contact with Yuvalgin's shoulder, he realized something was wrong. An overwhelming force rebounded through Yuvalgin's body and pushed Finks back over 10 meters. His left leg sank deep into the mud, and the brand new pair of designer leather shoes he'd just stolen were completely ruined. Only then did he manage to stop Yuvalgin's momentum. Finks didn't even turn to help Yuvalgin. Instead, he stared at Tianming in the distance, expression grave. That kind of power. It was inhuman. The sheer amount of Nen Tianming had unleashed earlier was still etched in Finks' memory. His scalp tingled, and cold sweat dripped down his back. Tianming's aura output was at least 5 times greater than his own. Could this guy even be human? No one in the Phantom Troop dared to move recklessly. Even Yuvalgin, still lying on the ground, didn't jump back into the fight. He might be brash, but he wasn't stupid. Before, he genuinely believed he could take Tianming in a fair one-on-one. But after just one exchange, that fantasy had crumbled. Among the troop, Yuvalgin had the highest aura capacity, slightly above Finks. But even that was laughable compared to Tianming's overwhelming energy. The silence was finally broken by Krollo, who took a slow breath and looked down at Pakunoda's body lying at Tianming's feet. His eyes dimmed for a brief moment, but then he lifted his gaze and spoke. "You can take Pike's place as the new number 9 member of the troop. Are you interested?" Tianming shook his head. "Not interested in joining any organization. Especially not one that's about to be wiped out." Krollo gave him a slight, disappointed smile. But before anyone could respond, Tianming suddenly shouted toward the nearby forest, "Come out!" Swoosh! A blur of movement burst from the woods, so fast even the troop couldn't track it. Boom! The figure appeared in front of Franklin and landed a punch directly on his chest before he could react. Ugh! Franklin was sent flying, his massive frame flung like a rag doll across the battlefield. The troop froze in shock. This newcomer's speed and power were on par with Tianming's. Now there were two monsters standing against them. Even when the troupe had faced assassins from the Zoldyck family, they had never felt so outmatched. The newcomer didn't stop. He vanished again and reappeared in front of Phaeton, aiming the same devastating punch at him. Phaeton, sensing the danger, raised his aura in defense. The punch barely missed, skimming past his scalp and nearly shaving his head bald. Reacting with lightning speed, Phaeton countered with a sword slash. But the attacker leapt back effortlessly and came to a stop. Only then did everyone get a good look. It was Gon, perched on Killua's shoulders, holding a black box, its contents unknown. The two had fused into a combined battle form, looking like something straight out of a Saturday morning anime. It was like watching Goten and Trunks from Dragon Ball. Tianming nodded approvingly. This was his own original fusion technique, inspired by the Straw Hat Pirates' hypothetical combo move Giant Emperor. They never actually formed the move in one piece, thanks to Robin refusing to participate, but this one was the real deal. Gon had raw strength but trouble landing his Janken, rock, paper, scissors. Killua had blinding speed but lacked raw attack power. By combining, they eliminated each other's weaknesses and amplified their strengths. Tianming called this combo, Lu Bu riding Dian Wei. As the old saying went, Lu Bu on horseback, Dian Wei on foot, together, they're unstoppable. Tianming believed with this combo, these two kids could one day become the strongest duo in the hunter world. But right now, that unstoppable combo was a complete mess. Gon. Aim properly, Killua shouted. That punch almost got me sliced. Gon didn't reply. Killua was about to repeat himself when something warm and wet hit the ground. A foul stench rose from the splatter. Killua's eyes widened in horror. Wait, what is that smell? He looked down and saw a trail of half-digested food, stomach acid, and bile sliding down his back. He immediately dropped Gon, leaping backward like a startled cat. Pinching his nose in disgust, he yelled, "Gon! Are you serious? You threw up while we were mid-fight?" Gon was on his knees, still dry heaving, pale and weak. "I'm sorry, Killua. I think I can adapt next time." Killua looked like he was going to explode. Inwardly, he cursed Tianming for coming up with such a stupid idea. What kind of bizarre logic leads someone to create a combat fusion technique like this? When Tianming had first proposed it, Killua had refused outright. What a joke. He may have rejected his family's assassin career path, but he was still a Zoldyck, a Baran elite. His family dealt with kings and top-tier Nen users. He had dignity to maintain. But Gon. That idiot had loved the idea. He practically begged to try it. And once Gon got like that, there was no stopping him. Killua had reluctantly agreed, but this was the result. Missed punches. Vomit. Embarrassment. He was going to kill them both. After Gon recovered, he climbed back up onto Killua's shoulders. A wire extended from the black box strapped to Gon's back and connected to Killua's body. It was a giant battery, specially designed to charge Killua during battle. With this, they wouldn't have to worry about him running out of electricity again. Chapter 86. Before Gon and Killua could complete their fusion once again, Phaeton, still seething from nearly being scalped, lunged at them with his sword. Fortunately, even without their combined form, Gon and Killua were formidable on their own. They easily dodged Phaeton's sword strike. This time, however, the Phantom Troop didn't stick to one-on-one combat. The entire group charged in at once, aiming to eliminate the two brats before they could finish merging again. But Tianming moved decisively, intercepting the rushing troop members and giving Gon and Killua the opportunity to combine. The full-scale battle between both sides was about to begin. From the moment it started, the Phantom Troop went all out. Their coordination was nearly flawless. Uvogin, Finks, and Franklin, the three powerhouses, formed the front line, acting as tanks. Behind them, Nobunaga, Phaeton, and Shanark took up the offensive role, ready to strike at any opening. Meanwhile, Maki and Courtepy were tasked with defending the non-combatants, Kurlo and Kalito. That's right, Kurlo was also considered a non-combatant in this scenario. His nen abilities were too valuable to risk recklessly. He wasn't someone who needed to prove himself by charging headfirst into battle. When the troop fought as a group, he usually took on a support role. And more importantly, Hisaka had yet to show himself. No one knew when or where Hisaka might strike, so several members stayed alert for a possible ambush. As the battle dragged on, Gon and Killua began to show signs of fatigue. While their strength had reached the upper echelons of the hunter world, they lacked true battlefield experience. It was like someone who had trained in a gym fighting a veteran of countless wars. Their stats were impressive, but they were being slowly worn down by the troops' relentless teamwork. Their stamina dropped quickly, and even the battery-powering Killua couldn't keep up. Seeing this, Tianming decided it was time. He feinted toward Evolgian and Finks, forcing them back, then concentrated an enormous amount of nen into his fingertips and aimed it at Kurlo. Spirit Pill. A brilliant blue light shot toward Kurlo like a rocket. The overwhelming pressure in that single attack made everyone's heart sink. If that thing landed, the target would be vaporized. Fortunately, the attack wasn't particularly fast. Kurlo, Shanark, Maki, and Kalito leapt away just in time. Boom. The ground exploded in a deafening blast. The shockwave hurled Kalito, who was closest, into the air like a leaf in a storm. Thankfully, Maki caught him midair with her threads and pulled him back to safety. Although Tianming had fired the spirit pill hastily without charging it, the force was still devastating, about twice as strong as Evolgian's Big Bang impact at full power. Not quite nuclear level, but enough to make everyone cautious. The troop was now on high alert. Any future attack from Tianming could turn lethal in an instant. Just as Kurlo regained his balance, two figures silently closed in. He didn't sense their presence until they were within 10 meters. It was Basho and Badoro, who had been lying in wait. They attacked from both flanks without a word, closing in fast. Luckily, Shanark and Maki rushed over in time, stepping between them and Kurlo to intercept. Boom. Boom. Two violent clashes erupted. Maki was facing Badoro. Though he was an enhancer, he hadn't trained in Nen for long. In terms of aura volume, he and Maki were evenly matched. She was able to hold him off without much trouble. But Shanark was up against Basho, a fighter so powerful that even Hisako had taken him seriously. After weeks of intense training under Tianming, Basho's strength had skyrocketed, far beyond that of most troop members. Shanark struggled to withstand the attack. In desperation, he flipped his wrist, summoning a bat-shaped antenna and fired it straight at Basho's chest. Basho narrowly dodged, and Shanark managed to retreat, rubbing his sore wrist with a grimace. "What kind of monsters are showing up today?" he muttered bitterly. Kurlo's expression darkened. Prepare to retreat. He hadn't anticipated any of this. What he thought was a scattered group of vigilantes or mercenaries had turned out to be a carefully organized team of high-level bounty hunters. Their goal was clearly to hunt down the troop. There were 5 masters on the enemy side now, each as strong as a core troop member. And among them were anomalies like Tianming and those 2 insane fusion brats. If the fight continued, the troop might win, but it would be a hollow, bloody victory. At least half of them would die in the process. That wasn't acceptable. The troop existed to pursue rare treasures and protect Meteor City. Not to throw their lives away in some pointless showdown. Everyone understood Kurlo's reasoning, but that didn't make the decision any easier to swallow. When had they ever been forced to retreat? 3 years ago, they'd only suffered minor losses against Silva and Zeno Zoldyck. And even then, they had chased the assassins down. But now, they were the ones being hunted. Still, Kurlo's word was law. One by one, the troop began to pull back, silently swearing they would return for revenge. But just then, Hisaka, who had been hiding in the shadows all along, finally made his move. He used his bungee gum to create a slingshot between 2 trees and launched himself like a bullet. No one expected his target to be Kalito. Shanark and Maki were tangled in combat and couldn't react in time. Kurlo, expecting to be the target himself, hadn't even looked in Kalito's direction. Schlick. Kalito's head flew clean off his shoulders, a fountain of blood spraying into the sky. His long black hair whipped through the air as his head tumbled to the ground, rolling to a stop. The troop erupted in fury. But Hisoka ignored them all. His eyes locked on Kurlo, his smile dark and bloodthirsty. He'd been waiting a long time for this moment. And now, the day had come. Chapter 87. Facing Hisoka's sudden assault, Kurlo calmly extended his left hand. A pitch-black, heavy book materialized in his palm, Bandit's Secret. This was Kurlo's Nen ability, the Bandit's Secret, also known as Skill Hunter. It allowed him to steal the Nen abilities of others and store them inside the book. At any time, he could flip to a page and make full use of the stolen power. Dozens, if not hundreds, of powerful and mysterious abilities were recorded within that book. No matter the opponent, Kurlo could always find a countermeasure. As soon as he willed it, the book flipped open to a specific page, and with a thought, Kurlo vanished. Hisoka's attack sliced through thin air. Just as he steadied his landing, something red fell from above, an ominous cloth. It was the stolen Nen ability of the Shadow Beast leader Owl, which Kurlo had acquired earlier. Hisoka didn't know what the cloth did, but his instincts screamed that being covered by it meant certain death. Without hesitation, he extended a finger toward the ground. Bungee gum, stretchable love. His Nen attached to the earth, and he used it to yank himself forward. The red cloth hit the ground behind him harmlessly. Hisoka somersaulted to his feet and narrowed his eyes at Kurlo, who had reappeared behind him. That wasn't just high-speed movement, it was true teleportation. There were no footmarks, no wind displacement, no signs of movement. Then again, it was Kurlo. With so many stolen abilities in his arsenal, teleportation wasn't surprising. Hisoka stood and grinned. I joined the Phantom Troop just for this moment, to fight you one-on-one. That's why I pretended to join. As he spoke, he reached behind his back and tore off the spider tattoo, releasing his Nen. The tattoo shimmered and dissolved into pure aura. Kurlo silently sighed. The truth was, he genuinely admired Hisoka. He had once hoped they could be true comrades. But now, it was too late. Without a word, Kurlo closed one page of the book and flipped to another. Opening his right hand, he pointed to the ground, and suddenly, a massive torrent of seawater burst forth, surging like a tsunami. This was a spatial teleportation ability he had stolen. It allowed him to link two locations in space, designated Point A and Point B. He had previously marked Point A deep beneath the ocean. Now, by opening Point B here, he summoned the ocean itself. Seawater flooded the battlefield in an instant. Those closest to the blast, including Hisoka, had to retreat quickly to avoid being overwhelmed. Tianming, too, halted his assault and leapt into the sky using Moonstep, narrowly dodging the towering wave. Uvogin and the others, locked in combat, allowed themselves to be swept away. The wave wouldn't hurt them, but it would cover their retreat. That was Kurlo's intent, to extract the troop under the guise of an offensive maneuver. Seeing the water rising fast, Gon shouted, "Killua! Use Moonstep, fast! If seawater hits the battery on my back, it'll explode." Killua immediately hurled Gon into the air, then used Moonstep to launch himself skyward. "My Moonstep can't carry anyone. You have to do it yourself." Gon gritted his teeth. He hadn't mastered the technique yet, but he had no choice. He channeled his Nen through his feet like jets, timed his step with precision, and launched himself into the air. It worked, but at a cost. The maneuver drained a massive amount of stamina. He and Killua landed in the branches of a nearby tree, barely escaping the surge below. From their perch, they scanned the battlefield. The entire Phantom Troop had vanished. Hisoka, Basho, and the others were gone too, presumably chasing after the fleeing enemies. At that moment, Tianming landed beside them using Moonstep. Killua looked at him and asked, "Can you sense which way they went?" Tianming closed his eyes, used his observation haki, then pointed in two directions. "There are two in that direction. If you move now, you'll catch them. But listen, if you can win, fight. If not, run. They can't escape my reach." Gon and Killua nodded and immediately split up to pursue the fleeing troop members. Meanwhile, Tianming turned toward a group he'd sensed earlier, Uvogin, Finks, and Shanark. They had fled underwater, hoping to escape detection. But no one could outrun Tianming's moon step. 10 minutes later, he landed in front of them. Having already fought Tianming once, Uvogin and Finks both recognized the danger. They raised their guard immediately. Then, Shanark stepped forward and placed a hand on their shoulders. He handed each of them a small antenna. They understood right away. Shanark's ability allowed him to control anyone pierced by his antenna. Once activated, he could force even powerful opponents to act as puppets. In close combat, it could be lethal. Though relying on Shanark's ability bruised their egos, both Uvogin and Finks knew Tianming's strength was on another level. There was no room for pride here, only survival. As for Tianming, he was done playing games. He'd already gauged the troops' capabilities. There was no more reason to hold back. He cancelled his Nen enhancement mode, and activated domineering mode. As his aura transformed, the seawater around them began to recede rapidly. By the time his transformation was complete, the water barely touched their feet. It seemed Krillin had cancelled his ability. Now it was time for the final clash. Chapter 88. The next moment, Tianming, who had been silently gathering strength, finally moved. In a flash, his figure disappeared, and reappeared right in front of Uvogin. Using Shave, enhanced by full-body armament Haki, his speed was several times faster than the Nen-based Shave he had used before. The movement felt familiar. He realized that compared to Nen, he was far more adept at using Haki. Clenching his right fist, he coated it with Ryu Sakura-style armament Haki and punched forward with full force. His speed exceeded even Uvogin's wildest expectations. Instinctively, Uvogin crossed his arms in front of his chest and activated Ken to harden his defense. But it was useless. Boom. The punch connected with devastating force. Uvogin's blood sprayed into the air in a perfect arc as he was sent flying. The impact shattered both of his arms, which now hung limp like noodles, completely broken by the penetrating Haki. The shockwave of the punch pierced through his aura defense and into his body, shattering his internal organs. Before he even hit the ground, his eyes turned white. His life ended in midair. Seeing this, Finks and Shanark, aka the Knight, were stunned. If Tianming's previous strength had been monstrous, then now, he was something beyond their comprehension. They knew better than anyone how tough Uvogin was. But he'd been killed in a single punch. What was even more terrifying was the absence of any visible Nen aura. There was no fluctuation, and yet this power was on a level they had never seen. There was no understanding it. The two came to the same conclusion immediately. Shanark, the thinker, turned and bolted. Finks, the fighter, stepped forward and began rotating his right arm, determined to stall Tianming with his life. He knew there was no winning this fight, but if he could just buy Shanark some time, it was pointless. Tianming's observation Haki had extended beyond 10 kilometers by now. His speed utterly eclipsed anything the Knight could manage. Even if he let Shanark run for half an hour, he could still catch up in seconds. Tianming ignored Shanark for now. He focused on Finks, condensing Ryu Sakura Haki into his right fist again, eager to test the limits of Finks' Ripper Cyclotron punch. Finks was thrilled to find that Tianming was giving him the chance to charge up. Ever since he'd developed his spinning punch ability, he'd struggled with control. The more rotations, the stronger the punch, but Finks wasn't great at math, and he often overdid it. He'd meant to knock opponents out, but accidentally exploded them. But this time? He had no intention of holding back. His opponent was giving him time, so he'd spin his arm until it turned into a fan, then smash Tianming into a puddle of meat. Finks rotated his arm faster and faster, his Nen swirling. From Tianming's perspective, his aura was now 2 or 3 times greater than Uvogin's at peak condition, almost on par with Tianming's normal state in Nen mode. Tianming couldn't help but laugh, his body radiating violent battle intent. He had never expected Finks, of all people, to bring him such excitement. He had underestimated him before. Eventually, Finks reached his limit. His arm wouldn't spin any further, any more would just waste energy. So, he stepped forward and threw his punch, aiming directly at Tianming's head. Tianming had been waiting for this. He struck at the exact same time. Fist met fist. The air around them crackled with the sound of lightning from the sheer force of the clash. The seawater at their feet erupted outward. A 50-meter-wide zone cleared of water in an instant. Beneath them, the earth cracked and shattered like a spiderweb. Boom! A sickening sound of tearing flesh echoed. Finch stared in disbelief at his arm. It had exploded from the impact. The shockwave traveled up his shoulder and into his core, rupturing every organ inside. But there was no fear in his expression, only admiration. He smiled at Tianming as he collapsed. To die to someone like you. That's a good death. Finch's broken body hit the ground. Tianming cracked his knuckles and chuckled. That punch had been strong, even his wrist felt numb. He hadn't felt something like that since training Nen under Netero half a year ago. He turned, vanished into shadow, and chased after Shanark. Less than 5 minutes later, he caught up. Shanark was still sprinting for his life, unaware that death had already arrived. Crack! Tianming snapped his neck without hesitation. Shanark's eyes widened in shock. Then, without resistance, he closed his eyes. Uvogin, Finks, and Shanark, eliminated. Meanwhile, Gon and Killua had tracked down their own opponents. But there was a problem. When the seawater had swept the battlefield, Gon's giant battery had been exposed to the water. The corrosive salt water damaged the battery. It exploded, rendering it useless. Without it, Killua had no way to maintain his enhanced state, and the two could no longer fuse. Gon was still battle-ready, but Killua had exhausted too much energy. He couldn't support Gon at high speeds anymore. But even apart, the two were strong. They now faced Nobunaga and Phaeton, standing in their path. The two troop members breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing that Gon and Killua were no longer fused, and wouldn't be pulling any weird combo tricks, they relaxed. Nobunaga pointed at Gon. "I'll take this little brat. You handle the lightning rod." He didn't really care who he fought, it was just a coin toss to him. But Phaeton stepped forward. "I'll kill this one myself." His voice dripped with malice. He still hadn't forgotten how Gon almost punched him in the head earlier. The part of his scalp that had been buzzed still irritated him. He was done playing games. Nobunaga shrugged. "Whatever." Then turned to Killua. "Let's take this elsewhere." Killua nodded and walked off without a word. He gave Gon a glance and said, "Be careful. He's strong." Gon nodded. He stared down Phaeton, forcing himself to recall everything he could about the man. He'd skimmed through files on the Phantom Troop, but most of it had overwhelmed him. He barely remembered their faces, let alone their abilities. Still, he remembered Phaeton clearly. He left an impression. Gon narrowed his eyes and muttered under his breath, "I'm gonna beat that short freak." Chapter 89. A sharp flash of swordlight grazed Gon's cheek. After narrowly dodging Phaeton's sneak attack, Gon leapt back and kept his distance, eyes locked on his opponent with full alertness. Phaeton's speed terrified him. During his fusion state with Killua, he hadn't fully noticed. But now, facing Phaeton alone, he finally understood why Killua had taken this guy so seriously. Phaeton wasn't quite as fast as Killua, but compared to Gon, he was significantly quicker. Thankfully, their prior fusion battles had forced Gon to adapt to high-speed movements. Without that experience, he would have been decapitated just now. Phaeton didn't seem fazed by the failed ambush. He never underestimated an opponent, especially not one daring enough to hunt the Phantom Troop. Even if Gon was just a kid, he took the battle seriously. Phaeton moved like a phantom, his body flickering through the air. In the blink of an eye, dozens of afterimages appeared, forming a deadly ring around Gon. Whoosh, whoosh. Sword slashes came flying from every direction. Gon dodged with nimble movements, but several strikes still landed, cutting shallow gashes into his skin. Blood began to flow, but Gon gritted his teeth and focused his aura to compress his muscles, halting the bleeding. Tianming had taught him this trick, though it came at a price, significantly increased Nen consumption. The longer the battle dragged on, the worse it would be for him. Thinking quickly, Gon closed his eyes. He released his N, spreading his aura outward from his body in a 10-meter radius. Within that sphere, everything became perceptible, soil shifting beneath his feet, drifting dust in the air, the scent of blood clinging to Phaeton's blade. This was the power of N, not just visual perception, but taste, sound, even motion became clear. It rivaled the precision of observation hockey. Every single one of Phaeton's afterimages was revealed, and Gon immediately locked onto the real body hidden among them. The moment Phaeton moved to strike again, Gon was already in motion. He opened his eyes and leaned forward. Tilting his head just enough to avoid the slash, he slid along the edge of Phaeton's blade and closed the gap between them in a ghost-like motion. Phaeton's eyes widened in shock. Gon hadn't used speed to catch up, he had predicted the attack through aura detection. Now, Phaeton was mid-swing, unable to retract or dodge in time. He instinctively raised his left arm to block. Gon's fist glowed with raw Nen, not a Jajangkan strike, but a simple, powerful straight punch imbued with aura. There wasn't time to charge up, so he went for raw impact. Boom. The punch connected squarely with Phaeton's arm. A sickening crack echoed through the forest. Pain exploded from Phaeton's limb to his brain. His body was hurled backward, slamming into the ground with force. For a long moment, he didn't move. He lay there, stunned. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been hurt like this. The pain stoked a white-hot fury within him. Snarling, he slowly stood up, tearing off his tattered shirt. He glanced down at his broken left arm, now limp at his side, and turned a murderous glare toward Gon. In a voice filled with venom, he spoke in a strange language. "You've made me very angry. Prepare to suffer." Gon didn't recognize the words, but he didn't need to. Phaeton's face said it all. He was enraged and ready to unleash something devastating. Suddenly, a thick aura engulfed Phaeton's body, morphing from invisible energy into a red and white armor-like shell. Seeing this, Gon's expression turned grim. He recognized it. This was Phaeton's ability, Pain Packer, more specifically, the defensive form known as the Unforgiven. It wasn't offensive itself, but it was highly resistant to fire and heat-based damage. Which meant what came next was Rising Sun, a blazing sphere of destruction that burned everything in its radius. Gon immediately stepped back, preparing to flee. Once that miniature sun was fully formed, Phaeton would unleash a wave of heat that could melt steel, and Gon couldn't afford to take a direct hit. The moment the glowing sphere began to form above Phaeton's head, Gon turned and bolted. Phaeton blinked, surprised. The boy was fleeing? A twisted smile curled on Phaeton's face. So the brat had learned about his ability. His secret had been completely exposed. But how? Hisoka? No. That was unlikely. They'd barely spoken since Hisoka joined the troop, and Phaeton had never used his ability in front of him. The other troop members wouldn't have leaked his secrets either. It didn't matter. He could deal with whoever was responsible later. First, he'd finish the brat. Phaeton cancelled the formation of the sun and took off after Gon. Despite the heavy armor, his speed remained blistering. Within minutes, he'd caught up and cut off Gon's escape path. "You're not getting away, brat. Time to die." Pain Packer, Rising Sun. The miniature sun blazed into existence once more. Gon spun to flee again, but this time, something jerked him backward. Looking down, he saw a white strap wrapped tightly around his waist, the other end connected to Phaeton's armor. Phaeton's eyes gleamed from behind the mask as he cackled. "This is a feature of my armor, the Unforgiven. Once an enemy enters within 10 meters, I can forcibly link them to me. You'll stay within that radius until I remove the armor." He paused, his voice dripping with malice. "I've never used this feature before. You're the first. Lucky you." Gon's eyes widened in shock. He instinctively activated Jijankan, scissors, forming a nen sword, and slashed at the white straps. Nothing. The blade bounced off uselessly. The sun above continued to grow hotter and brighter. Birds ignited mid-flight and disintegrated before hitting the ground. Trees turned to ash in seconds. Gritting his teeth, Gon abandoned escape and poured every ounce of his nen into defense. The heat was unbearable. His aura began to cook under the intense temperature. It felt like his blood was boiling. Still, he held on, eyes burning, fists clenched, desperate to find a way out of the inferno. Chapter 90. Watching Gon on the verge of collapse from the searing heat, Phaeton laughed with twisted satisfaction. For some reason, he had hated the kid the moment he saw him. And now, after having his left arm broken by this brat, that hatred had grown unbearable. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to use every torturous interrogation technique he'd ever learned to vent his fury. Unfortunately, he had already activated his nen ability. Now, even if he wanted to capture Gon alive, it was impossible. The only outcome was death by incineration. A pity, really. Torturing the boy slowly would have been so much more satisfying. Gon's aura was weakening by the second. His shirt had been burned to tatters, his skin covered in scorched patches, and even his hair was aflame. If he hadn't been suppressing it with nen, he would have been reduced to a bald, shriveled husk by now. Phaeton frowned. Why hadn't Gon died yet? Had he acted too hastily, triggered his ability too soon? He regretted not waiting longer. If he had, he might have killed Gon in an instant. Trying to break his opponent's will, Phaeton sneered and taunted. Still not giving up? The more you resist, the worse the pain. Give in now and die easier. But Gon, despite the agony racking his body, looked up at Phaeton with burning determination in his eyes. I won't give up. I'll defeat you. Phaeton's face twisted into a scowl. He hated people like this, the type who clung to their righteous resolve even as they were about to die. Why couldn't they just be honest? Get on their knees and beg for mercy. Why make him nauseous with this noble nonsense? At that moment, Gon moved. He grabbed the white strap around his waist and started pulling Phaeton toward him. When you activated your ability, Gon said hoarsely, I wondered why you didn't just stab me to death while I was immobilized. Why wait for the sun above to burn me? Phaeton's eyes widened. He instinctively tried to cancel his ability and back away. But then it hit him. He was still within the range of rising sun. If he deactivated his armor now, the attack would kill him too. Gon's voice came again, right into his ears. Judging by how calm you were, that armor must fully block the heat. So why not finish me with your sword instead of the sun? There's only one reason. You must have made a restriction or vow. Once the armor is active, you can't use any attacks besides rising sun, right? Gon wasn't just raw strength. He had learned nen theory from Wing, a master in principles, and Tianming, a battle-hardened expert. He understood the rules of nen intimately. Phaeton was a transmutation-type user, and his miniature sun was clearly his transmuted aura. But that armor? That was no transmuted construct, it was likely a conjuration-type ability. Gon knew that only conjurers and specialists could utilize conjured objects to full effect. For Phaeton, a transmuter, to conjure an armor that completely blocked his own main attack meant he had made a severe vow to compensate. Moreover, the armor clearly had its own rule, like resisting heat damage entirely, something only possible through rigid conditions. And since Phaeton hadn't made a single offensive move since putting it on, Gon had guessed the restriction. Once active, the armor locked him into rising sun only. In short, he couldn't fight back. And Gon had just pulled him into close range. With no hesitation, Gon summoned Jijankan and gathered all his remaining nen into his right fist. Phaeton's expression changed from calm to pure panic. He grabbed Gon's left arm and tried to wrench it away, but Gon's strength was monstrous. Even in Phaeton's prime, it would have been difficult to overpower him in a raw contest of strength. He considered striking Gon, but stopped short. If he violated the oath, the backlash would cripple or kill him outright. While Phaeton hesitated, Gon's fist landed. Jankin, rock. Boom. The fist smashed directly into Phaeton's abdomen. The impact blew straight through his armor and into his organs. His mind blanked from the pain. Blood surged up his throat and spatter splash. He vomited a mouthful of blood inside the armor. It didn't even hit Gon. It just splashed back into his own face. He dropped to one knee, barely conscious, his body racked with shock and internal trauma. He gripped the straps with his only functioning hand, desperate to stay upright. His mind was reeling. He had never come so close to death before. He knew it would only take one more punch, and it would be over. But cornered and desperate, Phaeton's ability evolved. His rising sun scaled its intensity based on how much damage he had taken. Now, gravely injured, it began to grow. The sun above glowed hotter, brighter, deadlier. The heat surged to the point that Gon's eyes rolled back. He was on the verge of passing out. Still, he gritted his teeth, focusing everything into preparing another rock. Then, Phaeton coughed up blood and laughed hysterically. "Do you dare kill me? Have you forgotten what happens with post-mortem Nen?" Gon frowns. Right. He had forgotten. There was a kind of Nen that grows stronger after death. If a user died with strong hatred or obsession, their Nen would linger, and even become more dangerous than before. And Phaeton? He was definitely the kind who'd carry a grudge into the afterlife. If Gon killed him here, that rising sun could explode uncontrollably, destroying everything, including himself. After a tense moment, Gon lowered his fist and made his decision. He grabbed Phaeton's limp body, hoisted him onto his back, and ran as fast as he could away from the blazing sun. Only after escaping its radius did he finally feel the heat relent. Gon collapsed to one knee, exhausted, every inch of his body burned, smoked, and scorched. His hair had all but burned off, leaving only a patch of tight curls close to his scalp. He looked like hell, but he was alive. And Phaeton? Phaeton had completely passed out, his aura vanished. He'd fainted from blood loss and trauma. For now, the battle was over. Chapter 91. In a forest several kilometers away from the battlefield where Gon and Phaeton had fought, two blurs clashed repeatedly, too fast for the naked eye to follow. Their violent exchanges shook the dense forest, and leaves rained down like a storm of confetti. The fighters were Killua and Nobunaga. Since Killua's battery had been destroyed earlier, he was reluctant to use his Nen recklessly. For now, he relied solely on his physical prowess. In each hand, he wielded a heavy metal yo-yo, a special weapon he had commissioned during his time at the Heavens Arena. With impressive range and flexibility, it was ideal for close-quarters combat. Killua had spared no expense to have these yo-yos custom-made. He lashed out with rapid, relentless strikes. Nobunaga, sword in hand, deftly parried the attacks, calm and composed. Neither of them had gone all out yet. This was a test of strength, a restrained warm-up. After another brief clash, they backed away simultaneously. Nobunaga exhaled, adjusting his grip. "You're strong for a kid. 12 or 13, right? When I was your age, I would have been KO'd after one punch from someone like you." Killua smirked, pride in his voice. "Of course. But hey, you're not bad yourself, uncle. Not many geezers your age can keep up like this." Veins popped on Nobunaga's forehead. He jabbed a finger at himself. "Uncle? I'm 28. Not even 30 yet." "What do you mean, coffin? Are your coffins on pre-sale or something?" Killua exaggerated a shocked expression. 28? I would have guessed 58. Nobunaga gritted his teeth, clearly annoyed by Killua's teasing. Killua dropped the smirk and got serious. "You should already understand your situation. I don't need to explain how terrifying Tianming is. He's probably already finished his fight and is headed this way. When he arrives, there won't be a chance to surrender." He crossed his arms. "The Mafia has put a massive bounty on Phantom Troop members, dead or alive. Which means we don't need to kill you, we just need to hand you over. What happens next isn't our problem. Maybe you'll escape prison. Maybe your friends will come for you. But if you don't surrender now, When Tianming arrives, you'll be dead before you can blink. Nobunaga didn't reply. Instead, he sheathed his sword slowly, positioning his hand for a butjutsu-style draw. At the same time, he activated En, preparing to strike. That was his answer. There would be no surrender. Killua narrowed his eyes. That was fine. He'd just kill him. Electric blue sparks lit up Killua's body as he activated Gut Speed, his lightning Nen ability. His speed skyrocketed in an instant. In a flash, he was already in front of Nobunaga. Nobunaga's pupils shrank. His En detected the incoming yo-yo a split second before it struck, but detecting and dodging were very different things. The yo-yo slammed into his face. Boom. Nobunaga was sent flying. Before he could recover, a flurry of follow-up yo-yo strikes crashed down from all directions, leaving him reeling and staggering. He hadn't expected this. He'd seen Killua's speed before, but during the previous fight, Killua had been burdened, supporting Gon, coordinating movements. It had limited his potential. Now? Killua was fighting solo, and at full strength. If Killua had been more adept at En, he could have ended the battle with that barrage. Just as Killua pressed his advantage, Nobunaga moved, subtly, within a blind spot. By the time Killua noticed, Nobunaga had stopped moving. His left hand gripped the sheath, right hand resting on the hilt. The aura around him shifted, fierce and dangerous. Killua's instincts screamed. Though the motion was slow, the intent was lethal. He leapt back, widening the distance and activating his own limited En, just 40 to 50 centimeters around his body. Not ideal, but better than nothing. From over dozens of meters away, Killua remained on high alert. At that distance, he should have time to react to any long-range strike. And yet, something felt off. The sense of danger didn't fade. In fact, it intensified. Then Nobunaga drew his sword and slashed at the air. To Killua's eyes, the strike was meaningless. It didn't even aim at him. No aura, no energy slash, just a swing. But within his En, the space around him shimmered, and suddenly, a slash appeared out of thin air, cutting 10 centimeters past his right shoulder. Killua's reflexes kicked in. He dodged with lightning speed and activated Ken, focusing Nen into his arm like armor. Slash. A red line opened on his right arm. Blood dripped from the shallow cut. Killua retreated, clutching the wound. If he'd hesitated for even a second, that slash would have severed his arm, or worse. But how? There was no visible connection between Nobunaga and the attack. Such a technique had to be targeted, yet there was no obvious marking. Killua scanned his body, and when he lifted his shirt, he found it. A strange bloody symbol had been etched onto his abdomen. Nobunaga sheathed his sword and stepped forward casually. Impressive. I thought you'd need a few more moves to figure it out. Didn't expect you to spot it that fast. He pulled a blood-stained seal from his pocket and toyed with it. My Nen's honestly kinda lame. I have to carve the enemy's name into them using my own blood for it to work. Without this seal, it's basically useless in a real fight. Killua chuckled and used his own blood to wipe away the mark. It's not lame. That nearly killed me. You've got some nasty tricks. Chapter 92. With his right arm no longer functional, Killua transferred the yo-yo from his right hand to his left. The decisive moment was at hand. Both he and Nobunaga released their aura to its maximum. Sparks flew as they stared each other down, neither willing to blink. A heartbeat later, they vanished from their positions. Flash. They crossed paths in a blur, then halted several meters apart, their backs facing each other, neither taking another step. Nobunaga stood tall, gripping his katana in both hands. Aside from the earlier injuries he'd sustained, he appeared unharmed. With a calm breath, he straightened up and slowly returned his sword to its sheath. Then, turning around, he began walking toward Killua, not with aggression, but with the quiet finality of a battle concluded. As he stepped forward, something behind Killua came into view, a severed left arm, pale and bloodied. The metal yo-yo was still looped between the index and middle fingers. It had been cleanly cut from Killua's shoulder. Nobunaga approached. Killua turned around, face pale from blood loss, but there was still a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his lips, as if the situation didn't faze him at all. "Didn't expect your ability to still be in effect," he said calmly. "I thought the mark would have disappeared after I wiped it off." Nobunaga scratched his head and replied lazily, "If it wore off that easily, my ability would be useless. The mark lasts for 30 minutes once placed. If I write it by hand, it lasts for 3 hours." Killua nodded in understanding. Then, raising his injured right hand, he opened his palm, revealing Nobunaga's still beating heart. He handed it back. Nobunaga took it reluctantly, grumbling, "That's why I can't stand kids like you. Your right arm was fine the whole time, huh? You played me. I hate sneaky brats like you." He didn't try to shove the heart back into his chest. His internal arteries and tissues had been severed. With Maki nowhere nearby, reattachment wasn't possible. Rather than struggle uselessly, he simply tossed the heart aside, walked over to a tree with thick foliage, leaned back against the trunk, and closed his eyes. Darkness enveloped him. He was gone. Killua exhaled sharply. Relief washed over him. He had been terrified just moments ago. His original plan had been to use his lightning speed to dodge Nobunaga's slashes, then counterattack with a precise yo-yo strike to the temple. But he hadn't anticipated that Nobunaga's Nen mark would still be active, even after he thought it had been removed. One clean, unexpected strike had severed his left arm. Had he not tricked Nobunaga into thinking his right hand was useless, he wouldn't have gotten close enough to rip out the man's heart. This win had been razor thin. He had underestimated Nobunaga badly. Before the battle, based on the troops' intel, Killua had ranked Nobunaga as one of the weakest combatants. His arm strength was ranked 9th, below support members like Pakunoda, Shanark, Kortopi, and even Shizuku. And Maki, despite being a medic, ranked higher in physical strength. Killua had assumed Nobunaga's weak stats reflected his overall ability. But he had been wrong. Nobunaga wasn't an enhancer, he was transmitter, and his swordsmanship paired with his teleportation-like slash had nearly killed Killua. Still, it was too late to worry about it now. The opponent was dead. Killua touched his forehead, half smiling to himself. He remembered how Illumi had implanted a needle into his head to suppress his emotions. Back then, Killua might have been more cautious, more calculating. Without the needle, he had started falling into bad habits, underestimating enemies again. Funny how Illumi, for all his coldness, may have had a point about control. Shaking the thought off, Killua picked up his severed arm and began making his way toward the nearby aura signature he recognized as gone. He didn't know where Tianming was, but he figured the man would catch up to them soon. Once they met, maybe there'd be a way to fix this. A few minutes later, he reached a river and spotted Gon cleaning his wounds. They both cried out in shock upon seeing each other. Gon's eyes went wide at the sight of Killua's missing arm. Killua, meanwhile, was stunned by how burned Gon looked. His long hair was singed short, fused strands clinging to his scalp. His clothes were charred beyond repair, and every patch of skin visible was blistered and scorched. Killua knew Gon's opponent must have been tough, but he hadn't expected this level of devastation. Just then, Tianming arrived. The moment he saw the two of them, he inhaled sharply. "What the hell happened to you two?" They were beat to hell, but both stood there like it was nothing. Typical. Without another word, Tianming pulled out a bundle of medical-grade bandages, kneeling down beside them. "Take your shirts off," he said. Gon and Killua complied without hesitation. Killua used his one remaining hand to slide his shirt off. Gon had to tear his off, the fabric had melted into his skin in places. Tianming started with Killua. "Can your Nen ability heal this?" Killua asked, hopeful. Tianming frowned as he began rapping. "Honestly, I don't know. I've never treated a fully severed arm before. I'll bandage it tight and see what happens." He wrapped the limb securely, speaking as he worked. "In the world I came from, pirates would just toss a severed arm to the sharks, then bolt a hook or cannon on it and call it a day. Either that or they'd just go full red-haired Shanks and flex with one arm." Killua nodded without comment. When the wrapping was complete, Tianming said, "All right. Try moving it." Killua focused and clenched his left hand. The bandaged arm twitched, then curled into a fist. All three of them exhaled in relief. That meant the supreme bandage was working. As long as the wound stabilized, his arm could heal. Next was Gon. His wounds weren't complicated, just massive burns. Still, Tianming carefully wrapped his entire upper body in bandages. When he got to Gon's scalp, he added an extra layer. "It'll speed up the healing," he said. But really, he just didn't want to keep looking at that burned scalp. It reminded him of a meme from his previous life, and he didn't need that kind of distraction right now. Chapter 93. After wrapping the two kids up like mummies, Tianming turned his attention to Phaeton, who was still unconscious. He'd already noticed the faint signs of life. Phaeton wasn't dead, just knocked out cold. But knowing that Gon was the one who'd fought him, that wasn't a surprise. With Gon's personality, it would be harder for him to finish someone off than to throw himself off a cliff. In that case, this head belongs to me. Tianming raised his fist, ready to crush Phaeton's skull. But just before the blow landed, Gon stepped in front of him with his arm stretched out protectively. Tianming frowned. "Gon, don't be so stubborn. Get out of the way." Gon shook his head firmly. "We've already beaten him. Why do we still need to take his life? If we kill him now, how are we any different from the Phantom Troop, the people who kill others without a second thought?" Tianming squatted down, getting eye level with Gon, and stared directly into his eyes. "We're also human. Why should we need to be different from them?" he asked calmly. "Because we are different from them," Gon said. "And I don't want you becoming like them either. Tianming, promise me you won't kill him. Please." The two locked eyes in silence. Beside them, Killua watched nervously. Deep down, he agreed with Tianming. The troop was dangerous. Cutting the weed without digging out the root only guaranteed it'd grow back. Leaving Phaeton alive might turn into a disaster down the line. But Gon was his best friend. And now he didn't know which side to support. He just hoped Tianming and Gon wouldn't have a falling out over this. After a few long seconds, Tianming sighed and stood up. "Fine. Whatever. It's not like he'll survive being handed over to the Mafia anyway." Gon beamed under his bandages, not that Tianming could see it through the layers of gauze wrapped around his scorched face. But just as Gon relaxed, Tianming suddenly looked off into the woods and shouted, "Kurlo? What are you doing here?" Gon and Killua instantly turned toward the trees in alarm. There was nothing there. And in that split second, Tianming vanished from behind Gon like a blur, swooped down, and punched Phaeton in the forehead. Boom. Phaeton's head exploded like a crushed watermelon. Blood, bone, and gray matter splattered in all directions. A geyser of blood shot into the air from his neck. By the time Gon turned back around, it was already over. His bandaged face twisted in horror. "Tianming, what are you doing? You promised not to kill him." Tianming walked to the river, casually rinsing the blood off his hands. "Did I?" he said, voice light. "My memory's not so great. I don't remember saying that." Gon's fists trembled in rage. But faced with someone like Tianming, he didn't know what to do. He could only glare silently. Tianming glanced at him and suddenly smiled. "Gon, do you remember the question I asked you during the Hunter exam?" Gon paused, then answered quietly, "You asked if you were a beast, would I still refuse to submit, even if I was beaten to death?" Tianming nodded. "Exactly. If this were a game with rules, then maybe I'd be bound by them too. But this isn't a game. There are no rules. There's no such thing as a guaranteed chance to surrender or be spared. You think that sparing Phaeton lets you stay true to your ideals, lets you keep your pure moral compass without becoming a killer. But have you ever thought, what if that's actually selfish?" He stared straight into Gon's eyes. "What if your mercy just gets innocent people killed?" Gon clenched his fists and said through gritted teeth, "If Phaeton ever comes back for revenge, I'll face him myself and defeat him again." Tianming sighed. "Gon, you're still thinking like a kid. Phaeton won't come back to fight you. You're too strong, and he wouldn't gain anything from it. He's a thief, not a martial artist who cares about honor. He'll just keep doing what he does best, robbing and killing. And you? You'll probably never cross paths with him again. Your goal is to find your dad, Jing. Maybe become a treasure hunter, or go find your own purpose. You'll move on. But the people Phaeton kills after this, those deaths will be on you. Also you could keep your conscience clean. Gon stayed silent. He knew Tianming wasn't wrong, but he didn't know how to argue back. Everything he'd learned growing up taught him to value kindness, to believe that treating people with sincerity would lead to being treated sincerely in return. But this world didn't seem to work that way. Tianming could see Gon's hesitation and stopped pushing. The kid was still stuck in a world of black and white, of right and wrong. But real life was different. As the saying goes, only children care about right and wrong. Adults care about gain and loss. If killing Phaeton protected more lives than sparing him, then the choice was obvious. If sparing him led to more bloodshed, then letting him live wasn't noble, it was naive. And that was what made Gon feel so contradictory at times. Sometimes, his thinking felt unique and inspiring, other times, it felt like he was walking around with his eyes shut, stubbornly clinging to ideals that didn't work in real life. In Tianming's mind, Gon was a bit like Ling Huchong from The Smiling, Proud Wanderer, a man who stood not for a faction, but for his own values of righteousness. When a conflict broke out between his master and the Sun Moon cult, his first instinct wasn't to take sides but to figure out who was actually at fault. But the world didn't work that way. Yue Buchun and the Sun Moon sect didn't need some outsider to remind them of who was right. What mattered was whose sword was sharper and who lived to tell the tale. Chapter 94. Tianming ignored Xiao Jie, who was caught in a mortal dilemma. After bandaging the two of them, he immediately set off, chasing after the remaining phantom troop members. At the same time, in a canyon over 10 kilometers away, two men with long white hair and tattered cloaks sprinted forward. They were Hanzo and Boudreaux. Their cloaks were ripped, and their bodies bore multiple wounds, though none were serious enough to hinder their combat ability. The two had been chasing Franklin and Peon, Phaeton's troop companion with holes throughout his body, after a fierce battle. Unsurprisingly, the outcome of the fight had tilted in their favor. Now, they were in hot pursuit while Franklin and Peon fled in a panic ahead of them. As they ran, Boudreaux grinned and commented, "That guy with holes all over his body was so loud. His weird dance made my head spin, I almost lost control of my own body when I got close." Hanzo nodded with a wry smile. "And that guy firing bullets from his fingers is a pain. He kept his distance, not letting me get close. When I finally did, his close-range combat wasn't weak either. Every phantom troop member really is a handful." Suddenly, machine gun-like Nen blasts rang out behind them. The two men rolled to opposite sides just in time. Franklin's bullets carved through the air between them and shattered a massive boulder up ahead. Seeing the power of Franklin's Nen bullets, both of them clicked their tongues. A direct hit would have turned them to paste. Then a sharp, grating sound pierced their ears. Both men instantly felt dizzy, their perception twisting. The entire world seemed warped, as though they were peering through a distorted mirror. This was Peon's Nen ability, Battle Dance. The mental energy emitted from the countless holes in his body created a sonic wave. Anyone who heard it would gradually lose their five senses. And once enough Nen energy built up inside their body, Peon could unleash his ultimate technique, Jupiter, to obliterate them. Piercing one's eardrums didn't help. This ability didn't rely on sound waves per se, but the Nen infiltration itself. Hanzo and Boudreaux covered their ears and exchanged a glance. Fighting the two together wasn't going to work, they needed to separate them like before. This time, they decided to switch targets. Hanzo would deal with Peon, and Boudreaux would take on Franklin. With their plan set, they both used Moonwalk to leap skyward, landing atop a sheer cliff. Then they immediately used it to hide themselves. Moments later, Franklin and Peon arrived below. They scowled at the steep cliffs. Flying using Moonwalk again. "This technique is really something," Peon remarked, pinching his waist as he looked up. That hunter we captured a while back didn't know how to do that. Must be a trick unique to these bounty hunters. Franklin grunted. If you want to learn it, catch them alive and hand them over to Phaeton for interrogation. No one stays silent when he's the one asking the questions. Neither of them knew Phaeton was already dead. They were still thinking about catching survivors to pry the air-step technique from them. Boom. The cliff above suddenly roared and cracked apart. Massive stone slabs tumbled down like glass shattering, and Franklin and Peon had to leap backward to avoid the debris. But then, a 10-meter-wide boulder came crashing straight down on Peon. Peon wrapped himself in battle armor, a transformation-type Nen construct resembling tribal gear, and stabbed his spear into the falling rock. The sheer force shattered it instantly. As the fragments rained down, a shadow fell from above. Hanzo, his palms pressed together. Tire bite fist. Roar. A thunderous tiger's growl rang in Peon's ears. The sheer aura behind Hanzo's attack made the hairs on Peon's neck rise. Hanzo had timed his attack perfectly. Peon had just released his Nen transformation, and he had no time to counter. Just as Hanzo was about to land his blow, a storm of Nen bullets tore through his body like paper. Franklin had activated his double machine gun. His Nen-fueled bullets riddled Hanzo's body like a sieve. With a smirk, Franklin lowered his hands. That monkey finally stopped jumping around. Now all that remained was the long-haired old man. Take him down, and they could retreat to Meteor City in peace. But then Franklin frowned. Hanzo's body, despite being full of holes, didn't bleed, it shimmered and vanished in the air. A Nen clone? As he tensed, the ground beneath him burst open. Two figures emerged at once, Boudreaux and the real Hanzo. Boudreaux tackled Franklin directly, entering the Ken state for defense and launching into a flurry of powerful blows. Though Franklin specialized in ranged attacks, his close combat strength was still impressive. He held his own with brute force alone. The fight quickly became deadlocked, Boudreaux's superior martial arts clashing against Franklin's raw power. Meanwhile, Hanzo had seized Peon by the wrists and began spinning him in place with shocking force. Peon was caught completely off guard. Normally, he could easily counter using his mental interference, but Hanzo had moved too fast for him to react. With a final heave, Hanzo hurled Peon high into the air. Peon soared upward for several seconds before plummeting back down. When he hit the ground, he tumbled hundreds of times before coming to a dazed stop, bruised, disoriented, and infuriated. Chapter 95. Phaeton gritted his teeth, his face so gloomy it seemed like water could drip from it, and he stared at Nobunaga Hazama like a demon from hell. Since joining the Phantom Troop, Phaeton had always crushed and defeated any enemy he faced. He had never suffered such a humiliating loss at the hands of a single person. Being thrown aside like a chicken by Nobunaga was the most degrading moment of his life. There was actually another, more personal reason he was so furious: his weight. Yes, it was that simple, his weight. The tribe he came from had a tradition of piercing multiple holes into the boys' bodies when they were very young. As they grew older, those holes were widened using thicker and thicker wooden rods. Eventually, their bodies became riddled with holes like Phaeton's. When they danced, the holes would emit sounds that could disorient enemies and overwhelm them in battle. Although this custom gave Phaeton great combat ability, the holes also made him significantly lighter than an average person. As an adult male, he weighed only 85 kilograms. Because of this, he greatly envied people like Uvogin or Franklin, who possessed massive, muscular builds. To him, that was what a real man looked like. That's why he was so enraged. Being thrown like a chicken by Nobunaga dealt a devastating blow to his pride, pushing his fury to the brink. His body swayed as he began performing a battle dance with the wind. Strange sounds echoed once more, and his aura focused on Nobunaga like waves of pressure. But something unexpected happened before his eyes. Nobunaga completely ignored Phaeton's sonic attack. In a flash, he appeared in front of Phaeton and launched a punch straight at him. Sensing things were going south, Phaeton immediately stopped dancing and raised his arms to guard his chest. He was knocked backward by the blow, his feet carving two deep grooves in the ground before he managed to steady himself. Nobunaga stepped forward silently, his fists like sledgehammers as he charged in again. Phaeton activated his ken and rushed forward with both fists. The boxing gloves he wore year-round weren't for show. Even without using nen, he was still a formidable boxer, and he wasn't afraid of engaging Nobunaga in a close-quarters fight. The two clashed fiercely, exchanging blow after blow. It was hard to determine who had the upper hand. However, as the fight went on, Phaeton grew more and more confused. His battle dance had clearly worked on Nobunaga before, so why was the other man now unaffected by his sonic attacks? Then it hit him. He remembered the aura clone that had appeared from behind the boulder earlier when he shattered it. Could the person in front of him now just be a clone? He guessed correctly. The one fighting him now was indeed Nobunaga's clone. The real Nobunaga was hiding behind a tree several hundred meters away, observing the battle. In fact, the clone shared sight and hearing with Nobunaga, but he had deliberately disabled the hearing connection to avoid being affected by Phaeton's sound-based attacks. Of course, the clone's combat power was limited. Although it was immune to sonic attacks, it was still inferior in physical strength. Nobunaga was simply waiting for the right moment to launch a surprise attack and finish the fight in one move. But just as he was observing closely, he suddenly realized he couldn't move. His body felt dizzy and disoriented. He knew this feeling well. It was the exact effect of Phaeton's sonic wave attack. What's going on? He thought. Why am I affected even though I didn't hear anything? Still puzzled, he looked through the vision of his aura clone and saw Phaeton mouthing something. Then, from the sky, a massive image of Jupiter fell and slammed into his clone. The clone raised both arms to block, but after only a second, it shattered under the impact. Nobunaga, viewing it through the clone's eyes, saw the falling Jupiter. But his original body saw no such thing, only the scene of his clone disintegrating. It was then he realized the truth. Blocking his hearing could indeed prevent sonic damage, but Phaeton's nen had already infiltrated his body. As soon as enough of that energy accumulated, Phaeton could trigger a finishing move. That Jupiter wasn't a real, materialized object. It was an illusion produced by detonating the opponent's nen from the inside. What exploded wasn't Jupiter, it was the victim's body. Realizing the danger, Nobunaga turned and ran. Phaeton's nen had built up inside him and could explode at any moment. If detonated, it could kill him instantly. But in his panic, he momentarily lost control of his aura. His nen weakened just for a split second, and Phaeton picked up on it immediately. Phaeton began chasing after Nobunaga's real body at high speed. The holes in his body produced an eerie whistling sound, making Nobunaga shudder. It felt like the footsteps of death approaching. Phaeton laughed maniacally and shouted, "It's useless to run. Your end is death. I'll kill you in an instant, I won't even let you suffer. Ha 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 tilde." Realizing he couldn't escape, Nobunaga knew he was in grave danger. He had no choice but to gamble everything on one final tactic. He summoned another clone at his previous location. He had used this ability several times already today, and his nen was nearly depleted. This was likely the last clone he could summon. The clone didn't flee with him, instead, it remained still while his real body continued to run. Phaeton noticed the clone getting closer, but it didn't attempt to block him. It simply let him pass. Was it going to attack from behind? He stayed on alert, and at that moment, he saw Nobunaga, who had been running for his life, suddenly stop and turn to face him. Now Nobunaga and his clone were positioned in front and behind, sandwiching Phaeton between them. But Phaeton wasn't worried, his finishing move was ready. He looked at Nobunaga's true body and grinned wickedly. Time to die. Activate, battle performance, Jupiter. Nobunaga looked up and saw the illusionary Jupiter manifesting in the sky. Though he'd seen it once before through his clone, he couldn't help but feel awe and dread seeing it again. He and his clone simultaneously pulled up the sleeves of their right arms. Their nen flared and condensed into sharp blades along the inside of their forearms. Then, together, they launched themselves toward Phaeton for a pincer strike. This technique was a theory originally proposed by Kurapika and later perfected by Nobunaga himself. For anyone else, It would have taken 2 people to execute properly, but because Nobunaga had a clone, he could unleash its full potential alone. This was his first time using the move in actual combat. Now he would witness its power firsthand. Chapter 96. Boom. A loud explosion rang out, followed by a cloud of smoke and dust. The blast from Jupiter engulfed both Nobunaga and Phaeton. The thick smoke made it impossible to see what was happening inside the battlefield. Silence fell within the smoke, as though the battle had finally come to an end. After a while, the haze began to dissipate, slowly revealing the aftermath. Nobunaga and Phaeton lay sprawled on the ground, appearing to have perished together. But after a moment, Nobunaga, who had been lying still with his eyes closed, suddenly took a shallow breath. His chest rose and fell slightly, and then he opened his mouth to inhale the surrounding air. His robe was soaked in blood, his entire body resembling a battered and bloodied gourd. Several grotesque wounds the size of fists pierced through him. If he hadn't used Nen to forcibly seal his injuries, he would have bled out by now. With great effort, he pushed himself up, using the ground for support. He let out a long, ragged sigh as he glanced at Phaeton's headless corpse beside him. It had been incredibly close. Fortunately, just before the explosion, he had used Nen to shield his vital organs and intentionally created several escape holes in his body to vent the pressure. Otherwise, if Jupiter's energy had exploded completely within him, not even a reinforcement-type user like himself could have survived. Come to think of it, the move that Kurapika had researched was extremely effective. But its biggest flaw was how slow it was. It gave enemies enough time to dodge. Improving his movement speed while executing this technique would have to be his next training focus. Dragging his injured body, he stumbled toward a nearby stone platform. Just as he sat down, a figure appeared beside him. Nobunaga looked at the person with a wary, helpless expression. Meanwhile, the battle between Badoro and Franklin had reached a fever pitch. Franklin used his long-range firepower to suppress Badoro, who was being chased all over the mountainside, darting between rock formations and natural cover. Each time he ducked behind a boulder, Franklin's aura bullets would barrage the area mercilessly. In seconds, the rocks would be shredded into rubble, forcing Badoro to flee to the next bit of cover. This can't go on, Badoro thought. If there's no other way, I'll have to activate my transformation ability. But activating his Nen transformation required preparation, and under Franklin's relentless fire, he didn't have enough time. That's when an idea hit him, a Nen technique that might buy him a few precious seconds. Acting on instinct, he slipped behind another massive boulder. Calmly, he removed his cloak and shirt, then placed his left hand on the stone's surface. This technique was a Nen derivative called Shu used to coat objects in order to reinforce their durability. The level of enhancement depended on the user's strength and mastery over Nen. The stronger your aura control, the more durable the reinforced item would be. Enhancement-type users especially could amplify objects to extraordinary levels. That's why most Nen users who relied on weapons trained this skill specifically. People often wondered, if Nen users are so powerful, why not use knives for sneak attacks? Why bother punching? The answer was simple. If you didn't know how to use Shu well, stabbing someone with a knife would be like stabbing a half-meter-thick steel wall. It wouldn't even scratch them. A bare fist imbued with Nen would do far more damage. Badoro hadn't specialized in Shu, he'd only learned the basics. But that was enough. He didn't need to turn the rock into an impenetrable fortress, just delay Franklin long enough for his transformation. And it worked. His body began to change rapidly. Orange fur spread across his skin, his physique grew larger and more muscular, and his eyes transformed into vertical pupils, like those of a wild beast. On the other side, Franklin began to notice something was off. His aura bullets weren't breaking through the rock like before. The boulder that should have been pulverized in seconds had resisted his attacks for over a minute. He immediately understood what was happening. The enemy had reinforced the stone with Shu, but that was a foolish move. Using Shu consumed aura. Reinforcing small weapons like daggers or swords didn't use much, but reinforcing a multi-ton boulder? That was another story entirely. There was no way Badoro had more aura reserves than Franklin. Bang bang bang. A torrent of bullets rained down, 10 blazing streams of fire hammering the boulder. Even a reinforced rock couldn't withstand such a barrage forever. Boom. With a thunderous crack, the boulder exploded. Franklin smirked. Looks like your aura ran out. Time to finish this. He grabbed his left wrist with his right hand, pulled down, and detached his entire left hand from the wrist, revealing a thick black cannon barrel inside his arm. This was his secondary nen ability, wrist bazooka. Compared to his double machine gun, it lacked sustained firepower but boasted immense burst damage. He aimed the cannon at the rubble where Badoro had been hiding. His nen sense told him the enemy was still crouched behind a large slab of stone. One shot would blow him to pieces. The cannon charged with energy. Just as he was about to fire, a huge figure suddenly leapt from the remains of the boulder. Its massive body eclipsed the sun, casting a shadow over Franklin. Startled, he instinctively rolled to the side to avoid the ambush, and got a clear look at the creature. It wasn't the Badoro he'd been fighting. Before him stood a towering beast, half man, half tiger. The creature stood at least 4 or 5 meters tall, rippling with thick, corded muscles. It was bipedal, with sharp fangs glinting in the sunlight and iron hook-like claws that sent shivers down the spine. Franklin's expression turned grim. He hadn't expected this. The opponent's nen ability had transformed him completely. It appeared to be an ability that greatly enhanced every physical attribute. Still, Franklin wasn't fazed. So what if you're transformed? Even if you turned into a god today, I'll blow you to pieces. He locked onto Badoro's monstrous form and fired. The giant bullet broke the sound barrier instantly and struck the transformed Badoro. Boom. A massive explosion erupted. Flames and smoke consumed the area. The power of that shot was on par with the spirit bullet Kurapika had used before. In fact, thanks to its greater speed, it was arguably even deadlier. In combat, power was secondary. If your attack couldn't connect, it meant nothing. For emission-type users like Franklin, speed was the real king. Satisfied, he reattached his hand. There was no way Badoro could have survived that. Now, it was time to check in on Phaeton's side of the battle. Chapter 97. Badoro had Franklin pinned to the ground. The sharp claws at the ends of his fingers were hooked deep into Franklin's shoulders like iron grappling hooks, rendering him completely unable to raise his arms and fight back. Franklin was furious. His aura surged wildly, trying to force his way out of Badoro's grip. But Badoro's claws were buried deep in his flesh, hooked tightly into bone. The searing pain made it impossible for Franklin to break free. If this continued, both of his arms would be crippled, and he would completely lose the ability to resist. Badoro, meanwhile, was elated. This was his first time using this transformation ability in battle, and he hadn't expected it to be so effective. Franklin, known as the fourth strongest member of the Phantom Troop, couldn't even fight back against him. Now that Badoro's strength had skyrocketed to unimaginable levels, the power gap was overwhelming. What's more, his defense had vastly improved after transforming. Franklin's missile-like aura bullet had only caused some minor bleeding and superficial injuries. It hadn't impacted his combat ability in the slightest. Right now, Badoro truly felt invincible. At the same time, another thought crept into his mind. Once he defeated this Phantom Troop member, he could go find Tianming and get revenge. He'd hesitated for a long time before choosing to transform. After all, the last transformation had left him with a massive psychological scar. He had even begun to doubt whether his nen ability was flawed. But now he was sure, his nen wasn't the problem. Zhao Tianming was the problem. Once he finished off the Phantom Troop, he would go crush Tianming beneath his tiger paws and ask him, who's got the flawed nen now? Just then, Badoro noticed Franklin open his mouth toward him, gathering an immense amount of nen in his throat. He was preparing to fire a gas bullet. Badoro was startled and immediately rolled aside to avoid it. Even with his enhanced defense, getting hit in the head by a projectile like that was no joke. Even if he could tank it, taking damage to the eyes or brain would be disastrous. His evasive roll gave Franklin a chance to get up. By now, blood was pouring from both of Franklin's shoulders. The muscles in his arms were shredded, making it hard for him to even raise them, let alone fire his double machine gun. He had lost the ability to fight. The aura bullets from his mouth could barely even scratch Badoro now. This battle was as good as lost. Towering over him, Badoro, now nearly twice Franklin's size, spoke in a calm, gentle tone. "Surrender. I won't kill you if you surrender." As a martial artist, Badoro had his own code of honor. He wouldn't kill a surrendered opponent. Whether the person ended up dying at the hands of Tianming or the Mafia later didn't concern him. But Franklin clenched his jaw, glaring at Badoro with seething fury. After a moment, his expression softened and dimmed. "Don't waste your breath. You've won. Just get it over with." Badoro sighed internally. If that's the choice, then so be it. In a blur, his steel claws sliced cleanly across Franklin's neck. By the time he stood upright again, Franklin's head had rolled to the ground. He was dead. Having defeated his enemy, Badoro let out a thunderous roar toward the sky. The booming tiger cry filled the mountains, echoing far and wide. In that moment, he felt completely unstoppable. Strength, speed, and martial prowess all fused into one perfect form. His physical abilities surpassed anything human. Was there anyone in the world who could stand against him now? As he roared triumphantly, a familiar voice shouted from a nearby rock. "What the hell are you screaming for? You trying to call a mate or host a funeral?" Badoro turned and saw Tianming standing with his hands in his pockets, eyes narrowed in annoyance. Tianming was exasperated. This guy's over 50 and still acts like a kid. He'd transformed into a tiger again, and right in front of him, no less. How many times have I told him not to do that? You're fighting an enemy, sure, but now I'm here, why are you still playing Jungle King? Tianming had assumed Badoro would calm down and revert to normal. Instead, Badoro roared right at him and began shouting. "I've hated you for a long time, you bastard. My nen ability, Hunter at the top of the food chain, is the strongest nen ability in the world. You only suppressed me before because you were jealous. Today I'll show you my true power." As he roared, Badoro lunged toward Tianming. Though he retracted his claws, it was clear he still intended to teach him a lesson, just not kill him. Tianming scoffed, unfazed. This guy gets a little sunlight and thinks he's invincible. It had been too long since he'd been taught a lesson. He was clearly itching for another one. Rolling up his sleeves, Tianming charged in and beat Badoro senseless. Afterward, Badoro sat on the ground, face swollen and covered in bandages. Tianming stuffed his hands back into his pockets, pulled out another roll of bandages, and tossed it at him. "Are you done acting out?" Badoro's face was puffy and bruised, but he put on a calm expression like a hermit who had transcended earthly matters. "Yes. I've learned my lesson. Please let me go." Tianming nodded in satisfaction. "As expected, none of the people I know respect me." Badoro looked obedient before, but once he transformed, he immediately turned rebellious and came at me. "I'm insanely powerful, why aren't people afraid of me?" In his previous life, Tianming had read tons of web novels and watched countless shows. Usually, when someone as strong as him appeared, everyone around them would be filled with awe and reverence. They'd speak respectfully, bowing and nodding. That was just the natural order. But in this world, everyone around him acted like clowns. Familiarity made them fearless. Am I really that unthreatening? Just then, Nobunaga staggered over. Under his cloak, he was tightly wrapped in bandages. It was clear that Tianming had treated him before checking in on Badoro. Tianming looked at Nobunaga and said, "You're too slow. If you came a little earlier, you'd have seen me beat Tiger Boy to death with one punch." Badoro turned his head away, pretending not to hear. Nobunaga replied with a sigh, "I'm seriously injured, you know. If I fall while walking, I might just die. Cut me some slack." Even though he could still move now, it was only thanks to Tianming's supreme bandage technique. In reality, he was on the brink of death. Any misstep, or even the aftermath of a nearby fight, could finish him off. He didn't have the luxury of arguing with Tianming. After settling the matters here, Nobunaga turned and asked Tianming, "Where's Kurapika? Did he catch the phantom troop leader?" Chapter 98. Two figures, a man and a woman, were running at high speed through the forest. The man wore a calm, expressionless face, while the woman looked visibly anxious. Behind them, a red-haired man with a crazed grin gave chase. Any trees in his way were instantly sliced down by the playing cards in his hand. The pursuer was none other than Hisoka. He had been waiting for this moment for who knew how long, and now, he finally had a chance to fight Kurlo Lucille one-on-one. The two people fleeing ahead were indeed Kurlo and Maki. After the phantom troop's formation was scattered by a massive tidal wave summoned by Kurlo, Maki had followed their instincts and managed to locate him. At the time, he had already been engaged in a fierce fight with Hisoka. Maki and Kurlo had teamed up to repel him, but Hisoka still refused to back down. Now that they were on the run, Kurlo had no intention of engaging Hisoka directly, thus leading to the current chase. Seeing Hisoka gaining on them, Maki looked up at Kurlo and said firmly, "I'll go stop him. You get away while I hold him off." Kurlo's eyes darkened at her words, but eventually he nodded. Maki would stay behind to buy him time. It wasn't that he feared death, but he understood how crucial his abilities and his position were. While Maki had valuable healing nen, it wasn't particularly rare or irreplaceable. His abilities, however, were another matter entirely. From a purely rational standpoint, letting Maki stall the enemy was the best move. Upon receiving the order, Maki immediately changed course and charged toward the approaching Hisoka. Kurlo used the opening to speed up and escape deeper into the forest. When Hisoka saw Maki blocking his path, he frowned slightly. He glared at her coldly and said, "Maki, you know my strength. This is suicide. I really don't want to kill you over something so dull." Maki didn't respond. She simply took out her needles. Hisoka sighed and shook his head. The two of them darted into the woods, their deadly contest beginning in a blur of motion and slashing trees. Thanks to Maki buying time, Kurlo's escape went much more smoothly, but along the way, he couldn't shake a growing unease. He had the distinct feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. Suddenly, a chain shot out from behind, slithering through the air like a snake. Just as it was about to wrap around his body, Kurlo twisted violently to one side, barely dodging it. The chain missed, then came sweeping toward him again. But this time, the attack was too slow. Kurlo easily avoided it and put distance between himself and the threat. The chain slowly retracted into the shadow of a tree. From behind that tree stepped a blonde-haired boy with a cold, intense expression, Kurapika. Recognizing the face, Kurlo nodded slightly and asked, "You're Kurapika? You know my name?" Pakunoda searched Shanark's memories. "I already know some basic information about you, and about Zhao Tianming." At those words, a layer of dense aura suddenly wrapped around Kurapika's body. Though the amount of nen wasn't massive, the quality of it was unusually high, charged with hatred and rage. Emotions had a powerful effect on a nen user's strength. The intensity of someone's aura could rise or fall dramatically depending on how they felt. Kurapika's intense aura made Kurlo wary, but he didn't panic. He casually summoned his conjured book, Skill Hunter, and flipped to one of its bookmarked pages. The two were ready, the battle about to begin. But at that moment, Kurapika asked a single question. "What did you feel when you massacred the Kurta clan?" He stared directly into Kurlo's eyes, searching for any trace of guilt or remorse. Kurapika didn't bother asking why they'd done it. The reason was obvious. Kurtais, known as the Scarlet Eyes, were one of the most valuable treasures in the hunter world. Being targeted was inevitable. He just wanted to know whether these killers, these monsters, felt even a shred of humanity when they slaughtered his people. Kurlo's answer crushed him. "I didn't feel anything in particular," Kurlo replied calmly. "I drafted a plan, assigned roles to the members, and then later saw the Scarlet Eyes being sold on the black market. That's all." Kurapika snapped. What enraged him most wasn't that his enemy was mocking him, but that Kurlo was so casual, so emotionless, as he described the genocide. It was as if the Kurta people had been animals, things to be butchered, not lives to be remembered. Kurapika's chain lashed out like a whip, slicing through the air. In a flash, Kurlo vanished from the spot. A moment later, he reappeared atop a tree not far away, analyzing Kurapika's movement and trying to determine the nature of his nen. Kurapika had already witnessed Kurlo's teleportation while observing from the shadows earlier. But it seemed this technique couldn't be used too frequently. Otherwise, Kurlo would have teleported straight to him instead of hanging back to observe. Kurapika's chain swept across the forest like a buzzsaw, forcing Kurlo to teleport once more to avoid them. Watching carefully, Kurlo began forming a theory. The chains were moving independently, likely manipulated by manipulation-type nen. Users who could control objects with such precision typically fell under that category. Enhancers could strengthen objects with shu, but they couldn't move them freely like limbs or fingers. Then again, Kurapika could also be a conjuration-type user. If the chains were completely materialized, he might be using them through conjuration and not manipulation at all. To test the theory, Kurlo picked up a rock from the ground, reinforced it with shu, and flicked it toward Kurapika. Boom! Kurapika shattered it effortlessly with a flick of his chain. The sneak attack had failed, but Kurlo smirked. He'd gotten the answer he wanted. He could now make an educated guess. Kurapika was a specialist, a rare type of nen user proficient in all 6 categories of nen. Not all specialists had access to all types. Most specialists only gained niche or support abilities. But Kurapika's precise control of his chains, paired with how easily he blocked a stone enhanced with shu, made things clear. Kurlo himself was a specialist who was proficient in all 6 nen types, an exceptionally rare kind. Most of his abilities had to interact with other nen users, especially since his ability, Skill Hunter, let him steal nen abilities from others. That sort of power couldn't be built without a deep understanding of every nen category. Kurapika was likely cut from the same cloth. Just now, Kurlo had attacked with pure enhancer-type nen, but Kurapika's counter was so fast and clean, his aura so strong, that it was clear, the boy wasn't just a manipulator or conjurer. He was something else entirely. Chapter 99. After testing Kurapika's approximate strength, Kurlo formed a plan. He teleported once more to avoid Kurapika's attack, and then turned to a page in his conjured book Skill Hunter, specifically, the ability he had stolen from the Yin Beast leader, Owl. At the same time, a piece of red cloth appeared in his right hand, which he tossed toward Kurapika. The cloth didn't move particularly fast, but its range was wide. Kurapika tried to pierce through it using his chains, but it was no use. The red cloth had spatial-altering properties, anything it touched would shrink drastically. Once shrunken, his chains no longer had the force to pierce through. Left with no other choice, Kurapika jumped to the side to avoid it. What he didn't notice was the subtle movement of Kurlo's left hand, hidden just out of sight. While his index finger held his place on the current page of the book, his middle, ring, and pinky fingers worked together to flip to another ability. Kurapika didn't catch any of this. After performing 2 quick backflips to escape the red cloth's reach, the fabric suddenly vanished, reabsorbed by Kurlo. Just as Kurapika was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Kurlo appeared directly in front of him, now wielding a long golden spear. It was a conical knight's lance, sharp at the tip, but without any edges for slashing. It could only inflict piercing damage. This weapon, called Vanguard Piercer, had belonged to a fallen nen user. When used on horseback, its penetration power increased tenfold. Seeing Kurlo lunging at him with the spear, Kurapika's expression shifted. He quickly dodged the thrust, then extended the chain on his index finger and stabbed at Kurlo. That chain, Steel Chain, was one of Kurapika's most dangerous abilities. If the tip connected, it could extract the target's nen ability and let him use it once. After use, the ability would return to its original owner. However, every minute it remained active cost Kurapika 1 hour of his life. A steep price for such power. Kurlo reacted fast. His sneak attack had failed, so he instantly pulled the spear back and used it to block Kurapika's chain. Kurapika closed the distance and launched into hand-to-hand combat, unleashing the standard melee techniques of Shingon-ryu martial arts. Kurlo discarded the spear and raised his arms to guard, engaging him in a brutal fist fight. Both fighters were capable of using 100% of their enhancement potential, so their punches were devastating. Every clash sent shockwaves through the area. Leaves, dirt, and debris flew everywhere. Trees snapped like twigs. Birds scattered in terror. But as the battle dragged on, Kurapika began to lose ground. His nen training was still relatively new, and his combat experience was lacking. Kurlo deliberately left an opening, baiting Kurapika into overcommitting. Kurapika struck, but missed, and Kurlo countered with a brutal kick to his stomach. Kurapika flew backward, crashing into a tree before hitting the ground and tumbling several times. He finally came to a stop, battered but conscious. Kurlo didn't pursue. He stood upright, watching silently as Kurapika rose again. Kurapika clutched his ribs, they were definitely broken. Still, he wasn't panicked. Instead, he looked Kurlo dead in the eye and said coldly, "I've already won." He raised his right hand, revealing the chain of judgment coiled around it. As he focused, a previously invisible chain slowly appeared, its other end wrapped tightly around Kurlo's body. During their earlier brawl, Kurapika's goal hadn't been to win through brute strength. It had been to bind Kurlo with his middle finger chain, hidden using in. This chain, Judgment Chain, could force any captured Phantom Troop member into a state of Zetsu, nullifying their nen. Kurlo couldn't break free through force. Kurapika had him completely restrained. The battle was over. But Kurlo, now bound, didn't panic. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Very clever, using it to hide a materialized object and catch me off guard. I didn't expect us to think so alike." Kurapika frowned, confused. And then his eyes widened. A red cloth suddenly appeared on the ground nearby, the same furoshiki Kurlo had used earlier. Before Kurapika could react, it wrapped around him. They were standing too close, and he couldn't escape in time. The cloth instantly bound him. Within moments, the fabric shrank down into a tiny package, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. A chain extended from a gap in the bundle, still connected to Kurlo. Inside that magical red cloth, Kurapika found himself in a pitch-black space. His body was restrained so tightly that he couldn't move. Still, he gritted his teeth and refused to release the judgment chain. At worst, they could both remain trapped. He believed Gon, Killua, and the others would finish their fights soon and come to help. But then a chilling realization dawned. The Kurlo bound by his chain had vanished. Not from breaking free, but from disappearing entirely, as if teleported. No. That wasn't the real Kurlo. If it had been, the moment the chain activated and forced him into Zetsu, the furoshiki would have vanished too, since it was one of his nen abilities. The fact that it remained, and was used to trap him, meant the Kurlo he'd bound was a fake. He was right. At that moment, the real Kurlo emerged from beneath a pile of leaves, still holding Skill Hunter in his hand. He walked calmly to the magical furoshiki, picked it up, and spoke softly. "You're very capable. But your combat experience is still far too limited. If you trained for a few more years before seeking revenge, I might really have lost today." He paused, then added, "But I doubt you could gather such a talented group of bounty hunters again. Facing the Phantom Troop alone would be nearly impossible. Your failure was inevitable." Inside the cloth, Kurapika exhaled sharply and finally calmed down. He released the judgment chain and stopped resisting. He couldn't even see his opponent now. There was no point continuing the struggle. With a bitter tone, he asked, "So what now? Are you going to kill me after interrogating me?" Kurlo responded quietly, "That was the original plan. But now, things have changed." Chapter 100. When Tianming was rushing to the battlefield, he discovered two ongoing fights nearby, one between Kurapika and Kurlo, and the other between Hisoka and Maki. He didn't spare a second glance at Hisoka's fight. As far as he was concerned, if Hisoka got torn apart by Maki, he had it coming. So Tianming headed straight for Kurapika's side. But just as he arrived, he witnessed Kurapika being captured inside a furoshiki. He called out loudly, "Hey! Kurapika, looks like the others finished their battles, you're the only one who lost." Kurapika, bound inside the cloth, gave a bitter snort. Still, he felt a wave of relief. Though he had trusted in Gon and the others, their enemies had been members of the Phantom Troop, and that had always left a seed of doubt in his mind. Now that he'd heard it straight from Tianming, he could finally relax. Even if he died here, at least his friends had survived. Kurlo's expression shifted when he heard that. He looked at Tianming and asked, voice calm but clearly tinged with anxiety. Yuvogin and the others were defeated? What's their status? Though the Phantom Troop were ruthless, they shared a deep bond. Kurlo had already feared the worst but needed confirmation. He believed someone like Tianming wouldn't bother lying. Tianming didn't hold back. He lowered his gaze, counted silently on his fingers, and began to recite from memory. Yuvogin, Finks, Shanark, Phaeton, Nobunaga, Phaeton, Franklin. Everyone I just listed is confirmed dead. Kurlo closed his eyes. His heart sank. That meant besides himself and Maki, only Shizuku's status remained uncertain. Everyone else was gone. After a long moment of silence, he opened his eyes and looked down at the tiny, bundled red cloth in his hand. "I assume your team's goal was just the bounty," he said. "Of all of you, only Kurapika has a personal vendetta against the Phantom Troop, right?" Tianming nodded in confirmation. From inside the furoshiki, Kurapika suddenly yelled in alarm, "Tianming, don't waste time talking to him, kill him now. He's going to use me as a hostage. Don't fall for it. You might not get another chance." Kurlo calmly raised his hand and deactivated the furoshiki. Kurapika vanished from his grasp. He explained, "I've sealed Kurapika in a separate dimension. Only I can bring him back. If I die, he'll be trapped in that space until he starves and his body disintegrates." Then he added, "You've already got the corpses of most of the Phantom Troop. That's more than enough for the bounty. Just return Shizuko to me, and Maki and I will release Kurapika once we're somewhere safe." Tianming nodded without hesitation. Kurlo blinked, stunned. "You agreed that quickly? You didn't even consider it?" In his mind, if Tianming truly intended to let them go, he would have hesitated, maybe even bargained. But this immediate agreement meant only one thing. He had no intention of letting them go. Tianming chuckled. "Do you take me for an idiot? I'd sooner believe I'm Qin Shi Huang than believe you'd actually keep your word." He continued, "Besides, why should I make a deal to save Kurapika? If I kill you, your nen will disappear on its own. Then I'll just track down where you stashed him and bring him back. Why negotiate at all?" Kurlo sighed and shook his head. So his bluff had been seen through. Turns out reinforcement types aren't as dumb as they act, just lazy thinkers. With no deal to be made, he stopped talking. He flipped open Skill Hunter, his conjured book. With his left hand, he turned to the teleportation page and pinned it in place with his index finger. Then with his middle, ring, and little fingers, he began flipping through other pages. This was a technique he developed to coordinate two completely different nen abilities, holding one active with his index finger while searching for another. Given enough time, he could even develop a bookmark system to store multiple abilities for rapid switching. In a blink, he disappeared and reappeared on a tree dozens of meters away. He raised his right hand, and with a wave, dozens of pigeons exploded into the air, all flying toward Tianming. These pigeons were made of nen. Tianming could instantly tell they were volatile, on the verge of detonating. But their speed? Too slow. Tianming tapped a branch with his toes and shot forward, bypassing the entire flock. Kurlo had expected him to be fast, but not this fast. He didn't even have time to teleport again before. Bam! Tianming's punch landed squarely on Kurlo's face. The blow was so powerful, Kurlo blacked out midair. As he flew backward, he forced himself to regain consciousness and flipped to a defensive nen ability with his left hand. Hum! A massive cube-shaped glass barrier appeared around him. Kurlo crashed into the inside of the cube with a grunt, then slowly slid down, his back scraping against the transparent wall. Blood leaked from his mouth and nostrils, soaking his hair. His signature slicked back style came undone. Now, his hair hung down, and he leaned against the glass, gasping for air. Tianming's speed. It was unreal. Stronger than their last encounter. Yet there was no outward nen aura from him, so why had his strength only increased? Struggling to stand, Kurlo braced himself against the glass and looked at Tianming. "Are you really not going to give me a way out?" Tianming didn't answer. He simply punched the barrier. The cube trembled, but held firm. "It's no use," Kurlo said. "This shield is a rule-based ability. As long as I'm inside, it's indestructible. But it only lasts for 1 hour. After that, it breaks, and I can't use it again for the rest of the day." Then, without waiting for a reply, he summoned the furoshiki again. This time, he held it in both hands, gathering nen into his palms. "I'll ask you one last time," Kurlo said coldly. "Do you accept my terms?" If Tianming refused, he would crush Kurapika, right then and there. Chapter 101. Tianming stood outside the glass barrier with a dark expression. He didn't want to watch Kurapika die. But neither could he accept Kurlo's terms. The only option left was to try and forcefully break through the barrier. He clenched his fists, channeled his Ryu into them, and struck the glass with full force. Boom. The blow landed with a muffled thud, but the shield didn't even crack. Desperation setting in, he struck again and again, his fists blurring into a storm of shadows. Boom. 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 Each punch echoed violently, but the barrier held firm. Inside, Kurlo remained calm. He shook his head and said, "It's useless. No matter how hard you hit it, you can't break a rule-based nen ability. Rather than wasting your energy, you should be thinking carefully about the offer I just gave you." He lifted the tiny furoshiki holding Kurapika and added coldly, "You have 1 hour. The second before this shield collapses, I'll crush Kurapika. Be rational." Inside the package, Kurapika had a rough understanding of what was going on. He shouted to Tianming from within. "Don't let Kurlo go. Kill him the second the barrier drops. Don't give in to his demands." There was bitterness in his voice, but also clarity and resolve. "I ended up like this because I underestimated him. That's my fault. But don't let my mistake force you to compromise. I will never bow to the monster who slaughtered the Kurtak lion." Tianming lowered his fists. He had heard every word Kurlo and Kurapika had said, but chose to ignore both. He didn't want to let Kurlo go. But he also refused to watch Kurapika die. He wouldn't limit himself to someone else's choices. He would break out of the trap and find a new path. Placing his palm on the transparent barrier, he fell into deep thought. How could he destroy this defense, kill Kurlo, and save Kurapika? He racked his brain. He was a reinforcement-type nen user. Gon, Nobunaga, and the others were all brawlers like him. None of them had space-manipulating abilities. No one he knew could bypass this shield to attack Kurlo inside. The ideal solution would be to bait Kurlo out. If the guy dared to teleport even once, Tianming was confident he could end him with a single punch. But with Kurlo's cautious nature, that was never going to happen. Right now, the initiative was entirely in Kurlo's hands. It reminded Tianming of how he'd felt during the Hunter exam when he faced Gon. He could easily crush his opponent, but the rules of the test shackled him. His fists were tied, and all that power had nowhere to go. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Only by clearing his mind could he find a path forward. Anger would only cloud his judgment. And then, a thought occurred to him. His nen ability, Yin-Yang Balancer, allowed him to convert nen into haki, domineering aura. But could it transform other people's nen, not just his own? He acted on the idea immediately. Closing his eyes, he stretched out his right hand. The yin-yang symbol of his ability slowly materialized in his palm. This was the true form of the yin-yang balancer, which until now had only existed mentally. For the first time, he brought it into the real world. He pressed his palm against the barrier and attempted to convert the shield's nen into haki. While haki was powerful, it lacked flexibility. Once the barrier's nen was transformed into haki, the shield would collapse, and since no one could control haki directly, the converted energy would simply dissipate. That was the theory, anyway. But reality was harsh. The yin-yang balancer could only convert Tianming's own nen. It had no effect on other people's energy, and definitely couldn't interact with a complex manifestation like Kurlo's shield. He sighed in frustration and withdrew his hand. The yin-yang symbol faded from his palm, returning to his mind. His idea had been naive. But his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. From within the barrier, Kurlo narrowed his eyes. He'd seen that ability clearly. It wasn't a reinforcement-type technique, it was materialization. Why would a powerful enhancer like Tianming invest time in a materialization ability? Kurlo didn't believe he'd do it on a whim. It had to serve a greater purpose. Could it be connected to the fact that the less nen Tianming used, the stronger he became? He had noticed this earlier. When they first met, Tianming's nen presence had been overwhelming. Now, he couldn't feel any aura from him at all. Yet somehow, Tianming was stronger now than he was back then. Could this be some kind of restrictive vow? A condition where less nen equals greater power? It didn't follow the usual logic of nen structure, which only made it more unsettling. Meanwhile, Tianming had no idea that his experiment had triggered such intense speculation. He only knew one thing: yin-yang balancer wouldn't help. As for his other ability, memories of past lives, that was just an auxiliary power. What now? Time ticked by. It had already been over 30 minutes since Kurlo activated the barrier. At this rate, Kurapika would be killed before it dropped. And then, suddenly, Tianming's eyes lit up. Wait. Memories of past lives. Maybe it's not just auxiliary. This ability didn't simply give him two inherited skills, pain empowerment and supreme bandage. In truth, it was a rule-based ability, a rule that applied only to him. This ability let him carry knowledge from his previous life, the world of One Piece, into the Hunter x Hunter universe. He couldn't affect others' knowledge, just his own. But what made that world fundamentally different from this one? The rules. The One Piece world had all kinds of busted devil fruit abilities. Some didn't even require physical contact. In the Hunter world, those abilities would be absurdly broken, a complete dimensional advantage. No matter how strong your nen, you die if touched by one of those fruits. Even the strongest nen users would struggle against someone with abilities like that. Take Sugar, for example, a high-ranking member of the Donquixote family. All she had to do was touch someone to turn them into toys. But even she couldn't transform someone like Kaido, a top-tier hockey master. Chapter 102. In the world of One Piece, as long as your haki was strong enough, you could resist the power of a devil fruit. But in the world of Hunter x Hunter, such a thing had never been possible. Take the reborn Ant King as an example. His aura was overwhelming, at least dozens of times stronger than Nav's, maybe even over 100 times. Yet despite that enormous difference, even at full power, the Ant King couldn't break Nav's ability, God's accomplice. If a rule-based ability like that is successfully activated, it will function regardless of raw aura levels. There's no as long as your willpower is strong enough, you can break the seal nonsense. The rules are absolute. And at that moment, inspiration flashed in Tianming's mind. His thoughts began to crystallize, an idea taking shape. If he was right, then combining yin-yang balancer with memories of past lives might truly allow him to shatter Kurlo's protective barrier. Without hesitation, he put the idea into action. First, he switched from haki mode back into balanced mode, then activated the yin-yang balancer, adjusting the ratio between nen and haki to a precise 1:1. He believed the attack he was about to attempt required both energies, and that they needed to be perfectly equal, neither overpowering the other. Inside the glass shield, Kurlo became alert. He gripped the furoshiki tightly, prepared to kill Kurapika the moment things went south. Tianming took his stance, left foot forward, right foot back. His left hand pressed open toward the barrier while his right fist gathered power at his waist. Aura surged across his body. It was the same stance Luffy used for the jet pistol in Gear Second. also a fundamental posture used by Marines in the One Piece world to focus their energy for a decisive punch. Haki and Nen coiled around his form like twin dragons, distinct yet intertwined, flowing together without mixing into a third force. As the energy peaked, Tianming's eyes sharpened. He thrust his fist forward in a blur, and the strike, infused with both Nen and Haki, slammed into the protective shield. If this were only the world of Hunter x Hunter, the rules would remain inviolable. But he was a man who brought pirate world logic into this one. In the One Piece world, Haki overcomes all. And if your belief in that rule is absolute, then even rule-based Nen can be broken. As his fist connected, Tianming's mind locked onto the target point of the ability, and his Haki surged to crush it from within. Crack! A sharp sound pierced the air. Fine fractures webbed across the surface. The cracks spread in all directions. And then, boom! A massive hole burst open in the barrier, shards of shattered glass flying outward with the force of a small explosion. In Tianming's mind, Haki reigned supreme, and this move, his ultimate blow, was named. Only Haki can override all. In truth, the majority of the effect came from Nen, since memories of past lives was a Nen ability, but without Haki, the breaking of the rule-based structure wouldn't have been possible. If the Haki levels were too low, the Nen would work, but the shield would hold, so the perfect energy ratio had to be 1-to-1. That balance was the key. Boom! The shattered barrier flung fragments in all directions, and the shockwave carried them straight into Krollo. Cuts and gashes tore across his body, but he didn't notice. His wide eyes and open mouth showed only disbelief. How? How could someone break a rule-based Nen ability? The rules of Nen were supposed to be absolute. He had assumed Tianming had used some higher-tier rule ability, but now there was no time left to reflect. Because Tianming's fist was already flying toward his face. Boom! Boom! The punch landed with tremendous force, hurling Krollo through the air along with what remained of the barrier, a nearby tree, and a storm of leaves. The fist's wind swept through the forest like a hurricane. Animals miles away scattered in fear. Those nearby were caught in the shockwave, their bodies breaking apart mid-flight. When the dust finally settled, Krollo was lying among shattered wood and uprooted earth. His body was mangled beyond recognition. The bones in his arms and legs were shattered, dangling limply. Bone fragments pierced his skin, blood pouring freely from the open wounds. His eyes were shut tight. Blood trickled from the sockets, they'd been shredded by flying debris. He was now blind. Krollo was alive only because of his tremendous Nen reserves. If his aura dissipated even slightly, he would die on the spot. Tianming approached slowly, his observation Haki and Nen confirming what his eyes already knew. This was no illusion or clone. The broken body lying before him was the real Krollo. He prepared to end it. But then, his Nen swept across a pile of rubble and detected something else. He froze. Eyes widening, he darted over to the heap and dug with frantic speed. Within seconds, he uncovered Kurapika. Kurapika lay motionless, his body bloodied and battered, barely clinging to life. Tianming breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed Krollo had attempted to crush him right before being knocked away, but had been interrupted just in time. Carefully, he laid Kurapika down, removed his shirt, and wrapped it around the worst wounds using his supreme bandage technique. Once he confirmed Kurapika's condition had stabilized, he carried him to a safe distance. Only then did he turn back toward Krollo. Now that Kurapika was safe, there was no longer any reason for Krollo to live. Tianming walked forward, preparing to deal the final blow. But Krollo, lying in ruins, showed no fear. He simply lay there, listening to Tianming's footsteps grow louder. His body was ruined, but his mind still raced. I'm going to die today, he thought. Maki and Shizuku might die too. But the troop must not perish. As Tianming drew close, Krollo rasped, "Wait! Look at this!" Tianming was ready to end him right then and there, but paused when something caught his eye. Krollo's conjured book, Skill Hunter, lay open on the ground next to him. Krollo whispered, "Open it." Tianming cautiously bent down and picked it up. In his current state, only Haki can override all. He didn't fear sneak attacks. Even a rule-based ability could be shattered with a punch. But when he opened to the title page, what he saw stopped him cold. There was only one line written on it. Chapter 103. Tianming stared at the black book in his hand, clearly recognizing the words written on the title page. He also understood that this was Kurlo's Nen ability, Skill Hunter. He gave the book a light shake and asked coldly, "Why are you showing me this?" Kurlo, after coughing up some of the blood in his lungs, finally found some clarity in his voice, though it remained weak. "I've already placed restrictions and vows on that book. You can read them on the title page," he continued. "As long as you're willing to become the new leader of the Phantom Troop, this book can become your Nen ability. You'll be able to use the skills within it freely, and even collect new ones. But it's locked with a restriction. You can't add new restrictions yourself." Tianming understood the offer. Kurlo was trying to bribe him with Skill Hunter. But something didn't add up. He narrowed his eyes and asked, "What's the point? Once you die, your Nen ability disappears. Even if you pass it to me, it'll vanish the moment you're dead. Or do you have some kind of healing ability in here, and you want me to fix you up?" Kurlo gave a faint smile and leaned against a chunk of broken wood. "You don't need to worry about it disappearing. Once I die, my obsession with the troop won't vanish, it will turn into a post-mortem Nen. My ability will remain in this world." Tianming nodded. That checked out. In the world of Hunter x Hunter, post-mortem Nen was one of the most terrifying phenomena. You could kill your enemy, but if their will was strong enough, their ability wouldn't disappear. In fact, it could become permanent and even more dangerous. Take the example from the original story, Kurapika's Judgment Chain. Once placed on Kurlo, even after learning Kurapika's identity, the Phantom Troop didn't dare retaliate. Because if Kurapika died, the Nen ability would become Death-bound Nen, and even a Nen exorcist wouldn't be able to remove it. Only something on the level of Nenika, Wishing Princess, might be able to help. Thinking it through, Tianming gave Kurlo a wry smile. "You seem to be overestimating my moral compass," he said. "What if I do become the next troop leader, but then I disband the troop? Or just pass the title to someone else? Wouldn't that ruin your plan?" Kurlo smirked, a trace of pride returning to his face. "That's why I wrote the restriction as a gift to the new captain of the Phantom Troop. Only the official leader of the troop can inherit this Nen ability. If you disband the troop or pass the leadership to someone else, the ability will vanish." Tianming understood now, this was more than a bribe. It was insurance. Kurlo knew Tianming's power rivaled the strongest in the world, possibly even exceeding the Hunter Association chairman, or those ancient monsters lurking in the shadows. If a person of that caliber simply held the title of Phantom Troop Leader, it would be enough to intimidate all major forces in the Hunter world. No matter how arrogant the upper echelons of V5 or the Kakan Empire might be, even they wouldn't dare provoke someone like Tianming lightly. Kurlo's true goal hadn't been chaos or plunder, it had always been about defending Meteor Street. While it was known as the slum of the world, Meteor Street had long been treated as a dumping ground by V5 and other nations. The Phantom Troop wasn't just a gang, they were a shield, built to ensure that those who came to scavenge or steal would think twice. They didn't care what trash was thrown in, but no one was allowed to take anything out. Until now, the troop had been powerful, but not powerful enough to deter the world's superpowers. But with Tianming at the helm, even if just symbolically, everything would change. Kurlo waited, eyes dim, for Tianming's answer. But all he heard was the dull thump of a book hitting the dirt. Tianming had casually tossed the Skill Hunter to the ground. "I refuse," he said bluntly. "I don't like being tied down. Why would I become a glorified garbage dump guard for some second-hand black book?" Kurlo was silent for a moment. Then, with a tinge of regret in his voice, he murmured, "I see. That's a shame." His tone carried disappointment. He had truly hoped Tianming might carry on the troop's legacy. But Tianming had no more patience. He stepped forward and drove his fist into Kurlo's chest. Armament Haki, Ryu, exploded through his body, instantly destroying his internal organs. His heart, lungs, and stomach were shredded into a paste. The shockwave surged up through his nervous system, obliterating his brain in the same instant. Kurlo's body froze. Blood streamed from his mouth, nose, and ears. Then he slumped forward, lifeless. The Skill Hunter book on the ground slowly began to fade, its pages turning transparent before vanishing completely. But Tianming knew, it wasn't truly gone. Kurlo's obsession, his fierce will to protect Meteor Street and the troop, had not vanished. The Nen ability still existed, suspended by his death-anchored will. It had simply gone dormant. One day, when someone became the new leader of the troop, the book would appear again, and become a second Nen ability alongside their own. And strangely, Tianming found himself impressed. Normally, post-mortem Nen couldn't be controlled. It acted out the user's final will, blindly. But Kurlo had imposed oaths and conditions on it while alive, creating a structured inheritance for the next leader. It was a disturbing, but brilliant, use of Nen. And then, a memory came back to Tianming. Back to the final stage of the Hunter exam, when Netero declared, "You cannot kill your opponent. You can only force them to surrender." At the time, it seemed like just another trial. But now, Tianming realized. The purpose of that exam had been to test how they would face an enemy filled with death-bound conviction, a man like Kurlo, whose spirit would linger, whose power would not fade with death. Chapter 104. Not long after Kurlo died, a battered but visibly excited figure appeared before Tianming. It was none other than Hisoka. He had rushed over after finishing his fight with Maki, but when he arrived and saw Kurlo's lifeless body, the excitement froze on his face, replaced by bitter disappointment. Kurlo was dead. Hisoka had done all this for the thrill of a one-on-one duel, but in the end, he had still arrived too late. Kurlo had already been killed by Tianming. What a waste. A powerful, intriguing opponent like Kurlo, gone just like that. As for Tianming, Hisoka wasn't sure how to feel. He was definitely interested in fighting him, but not right now. He enjoyed fighting strong opponents, but he wasn't suicidal. Tianming was far stronger than him at the moment. If he wanted to challenge him, he'd need to get stronger first. Tianming noticed Hisoka lingering silently and smirked. He waved and called out, "All right, stop standing there like an idiot. My team's about to clean up the battlefield and cash in the bounty. If you're done here, you can go home." Hisoka's expression twisted into something hard to read. He pointed to himself and asked, "I helped out, didn't I? I took on the most dangerous task. Don't I get a cut of the bounty?" Tianming looked at him with disdain. "You're not part of our team. Why would we give you anything?" He added, "You volunteered to go undercover. We didn't invite you. So why should we give you a share now?" Hisoka nearly dropped his fake smile. He wanted to argue, but couldn't. As shameless as Tianming sounded, he kind of had a point. Finally, Hisoka shrugged and turned to leave. If he wasn't welcome, there was no point sticking around. Whatever. He had more than enough money anyway. Through Illumi's network in the underworld, he could take on assassination jobs worth hundreds of billions. Compared to that, the Phantom Troop bounty was pocket change. Truth be told, Tianming didn't care much about the troop's bounty either. He could sell a few game consoles from his previous world and make more. The real purpose of this mission was to build his own team and prepare for exploring the Dark Continent. Before long, Nobunaga, gone, and the others arrived one after another. Though their bodies were wrapped in bandages, their spirits were high. The real reward from this battle wasn't money, but experience and reputation. They had fought against world-class opponents. Soon, their names would spread across the Hunter world. Tianming interrupted their celebration with a command, "Everyone, gather the bodies of the Phantom Troop. Let's count and make sure none slipped through." Everyone nodded and got to work. Though they were all heavily bandaged, Tianming's supreme bandage technique had accelerated their recovery. While strenuous combat was out of the question, moving a few corpses was manageable. Soon, 10 bodies were laid out before them. Kurlo, Pakunoda, Kortopi, Shanark, Uvogin, Nobunaga, Finks, Franklin, Phaeton, Benolanov. But something felt off. Gon counted them twice on his fingers before slapping his thigh. Wait, Hisoka's body is missing. Killua smacked him on the back of the head and snapped, "You idiot. Hisoka wasn't one of the targets. He infiltrated the troop and worked with us. Why would his body be here?" He silently added to himself, "What a shame. If his body was here, maybe we wouldn't have to deal with that creep anymore." Tianming double-checked the list. The Phantom Troop had 13 members. Excluding the traitor Hisoka and Shizuku, who was captured, that left one unaccounted for. "Maki's missing," Tianming muttered. He looked around and asked if anyone had seen Maki's body. Everyone shook their heads. Frowning, Tianming activated observation haki, scanning the surroundings. The area where Hisoka had fought Maki was now just trouble, no trace of a body. And Hisoka himself had also left the detection range. TCH. So Hisoka took her with him. Maybe she wasn't dead. Knowing Hisoka, he might have just knocked her out and dragged her off for his own twisted reasons. "Damn you, you petty bastard. Just because I didn't give you a share of the bounty?" Still, it wasn't a big deal. Maki was dangerous, but without the troop backing her, she was just a stray dog. She wouldn't be able to cause any serious trouble. Tianming turned to Kurapika, who had just regained consciousness. He asked, "Is there anything else you want to do?" After all, the rest of the team had joined for money. But Kurapika had joined for revenge. In this whole battle, he hadn't landed the final blow on a single troop member, and had nearly died himself. It had to feel like a bitter loss. But Kurapika wasn't angry, just quiet. His whole demeanor was subdued, like someone who had finally completed a long quest, only to find himself directionless afterward. Tianming watched him with a mix of amusement and concern. Don't tell me this guy's gonna become a monk or something. He imagined Kurapika with a shaved head, chanting mantras while tapping a wooden fish. The image was so absurd he almost laughed, quickly turning away to hide his smirk. Kurapika didn't notice. He silently raised a chain wrapped around his right hand and brought it to his lips, whispering a soft prayer. No one interrupted. They stood in silence as he prayed. At some point, tears began running down his cheeks, but he didn't stop. The prayer lasted nearly 2 hours. When it finally ended, Kurapika lowered his hands, wiped his eyes, and raised his head. His face was visibly lighter. The weight of vengeance had been lifted. It was as if his hatred had finally been washed away. Everyone around him breathed easier. People couldn't live on hatred alone forever. After the killing, it was time to eat, drink, and move on. Worst case, they could always go dance on the enemy's grave. With everything settled, it was time for Leorio to take the stage. He had been assigned logistics duty, specifically, transporting the corpses to the Mafia to claim the bounty. Tianming pulled out his phone and dialed Leorio's number. By now, he should have prepared vehicles and body bags at the base, ready for their return. But the call went unanswered. Frowning, Tianming hung up and turned to Kurapika. "Try calling him." Kurapika nodded and dialed as well. But the result was the same. The phone rang and rang, no answer. Chapter 105. After Kurlo's death, Kurapika voiced his concerns about Leorio, who still hadn't responded to their calls. Tianming nodded thoughtfully and issued instructions. "Boudreaux, Gon, and Kurapika, you stay here. The rest of you, come with me." Boudreaux and Gon had suffered the least among the team. In fact, Boudreaux's worst injuries were the ones he'd inflicted on himself during his transformation. Tianming felt confident leaving them behind with Kurapika to guard the Phantom Troop corpses. No one objected. So Killua, who washed along, and Tianming headed for their temporary base. On the way, they encountered a group of gangsters searching for Phantom Troop members. The three of them made quick work of them, stole their vehicle, and sped off toward the city. It was nearing dawn. The roads were empty, so they reached their base, an unfinished building in the South District, in no time. But the moment they stepped out of the car, they knew something was wrong. Fresh debris was scattered across the first floor, Broken bricks, cracked cement. There had clearly been a fight here. And from the damage, it wasn't just some random thug. This looked like the aftermath of Nen combat. Could someone with abilities have attacked Leorio? The three exchanged glances, and immediately leapt upward using Moon Step. The scene that met their eyes was shocking. Leorio lay sprawled on the floor, soaked in blood, eyes shut tight. The area was littered with signs of violent struggle. And nearby, another figure lay still, Shizuku, the last missing member of the Phantom Troupe. Her body was grotesquely shriveled. Her once smooth skin now looked mummified. Underneath her torn clothes, she was skin and bone. Her body had turned an unnatural purplish blue, like something straight out of a horror movie. A blood-red dagger was lodged in her chest. Tianming recognized it immediately. It was the blood knife, a weapon he'd taken as a trophy in a past battle. Since he didn't specialize in daggers, he'd given it to Leorio, who was more proficient with them. So, Leorio had killed Shizuku? Then who the hell had beaten Leorio this badly? That could wait. Tianming immediately wrapped Leorio in a layer of supreme bandage, then sat by to wait for him to regain consciousness. Everyone on their team had taken damage today. The worst off was probably Huashidu Long, who had several gaping wounds in his body. If Tianming hadn't arrived in time, he would have bled out on the spot. But Leorio was a close second. His physical resilience was nowhere near Huashidu Long's, and his injuries were internal, serious blood trauma. While applying the bandages, Tianming even noticed his spine was broken. If not for the supreme bandage, Leorio might have spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. A few minutes passed. Leorio stirred, then suddenly sprang upright and shouted, "Ghost! God damn it!" Tianming nearly punched him. If Leorio hadn't just been at death's door, he might have given him a wake-up slap then and there. Leorio blinked, slowly regaining his senses. Realizing how ridiculous he must have looked, he gave an awkward laugh. "Why didn't you call me when you guys got back?" he asked, rubbing his head. "I could have driven the corpse truck over." Tianming's face twitched. He pointed at Leorio's nose and deadpanned, "We came to pick up Phantom Troupe corpses, not ourselves." At this point, Tianming just wanted to say, "I surrender. You win, Leorio." This guy was half dead a second ago, and now he was bouncing around like nothing happened. Truly the embodiment of the emission type, energetic, reckless, and always charging ahead. At first, Tianming thought enhancers were the most impulsive and violent of the 6 Nan types. But the more he learned, the more he realized that emission types were even worse. Enhancers were stubborn and headstrong, emission types were just hot-blooded lunatics. Leorio, in front of them, and Knuckle later on, were perfect examples. Characters like this were great for fiction. They made strong enemies look terrifying and gave protagonists opportunities to shine. Like early Naruto or Vegeta in Dragon Ball, classic frontline punching bags. They'd rush into danger, get beat to a pulp, then someone else would show up to save the day. That's also why Naruto's personality was forcibly rewritten later on. Characters like him could never truly be the protagonist. They'd always either charge in to win recklessly or charge in to die dramatically. There was no in-between. After Leorio finished his rambling, Tianming and the others finally pieced together what had happened. Before leaving, they'd asked Leorio to keep an eye on Shizuku. To be extra safe, they'd wrapped her in multiple layers of iron chains. With her nen sealed by Kurapika's oath chain, she had no chance of breaking free. Even if she somehow escaped, Leorio was a nen user. They figured it would be easy for him to handle her. But Leorio had made one mistake. He was nice. Shizuko told him she had to use the bathroom. And Leorio, being the kind soul he was, brought over a urinal, insisting she relieve herself in front of him so he could ensure her safety. Just as he was staring attentively at her, probably with very unwholesome thoughts, Shizuku struck. A scissors kick nearly snapped his neck. At the same time, she shattered the chains and the two began to fight. Killua interrupted the story, staring at Leorio with a look of pure disdain. "Wait," he said. That woman had Kurapika's judgment chain on her. She couldn't choose nen. So you're telling me she beat the crap out of you without using any nen? Leorio scratched the back of his head awkwardly and nodded. Killua slapped his forehead. Who Washidu alongside? Even Tianming couldn't help but twitch a little. This guy's a lost cause. Shizuku, without nen, was essentially a regular person. Leorio, who had learned the four major principles, ten, Zetsu, Ren, Hatsu, should have been more than capable of handling her. But the truth was, he got wrecked. The others in the group were elite nen users. Naturally, they had little sense of just how dangerous even an ordinary phantom troop member could be. Even without nen, Shizuku was still a trained combatant, born and raised on Meteor Street. Someone like Leorio, barely a year into his nen training, was no match. Chapter 106. After confirming that Leorio wasn't seriously hurt, the operation resumed as planned. He drove the large truck, prepared well in advance, loaded with dozens of body bags to the location Tianming had designated. Not long after, Leorio arrived. Seeing the 10 phantom troop corpses lying in the dirt, he whistled softly. The infamous group that had terrified the hunter world for so long had been reduced to corpses, each more wretched than the last. For a moment, Leorio couldn't help but feel that Tianming and his team were monsters even scarier than the troop themselves. After some quick discussion, it was decided that Kurapika and Boudreaux would accompany Leorio to the Mafia Association to hand over the bodies. Kurapika was brought along because he had connections with the Mafia through the Nostrade family, and Boudreaux was the least injured of the group, besides Tianming, and still retained full combat strength, just in case something unexpected happened. As the sun rose over the horizon, Leorio and the others successfully delivered the bodies to the Mafia Association. The reaction was explosive. The Mafia had been panicking after the defeat of the Shadow Beasts, and were already negotiating with the Zoldyck family to hire an assassin to deal with the Phantom Troop. But before their hired killer could even arrive, the bodies were already stacked and delivered to their doorstep. After carefully confirming their identities, the Mafia's fear gave way to all. Kurapika, Leorio, and Boudreaux were all treated with deep respect, especially Kurapika, once they learned he was working under the Nostrade family. In fact, the leader of the Guard family, ranked third among the 10 Dons, called personally to invite Kurapika to join the Mafia Association as a new Shadow Beast leader. Kurapika politely declined. The call ended without pressure, but the Don made it clear, if Kurapika ever changed his mind, that position would be waiting for him. When Tianming heard about it, he laughed so hard his abs flexed visibly. What animal is Kurapika supposed to be if he joins the Shadow Beasts? The red-eyed monster? Honestly, Boudreaux was more fitting. He could literally turn into a tiger. He looked more like a beast than most of the actual Shadow Beasts. After receiving the bounty, the group divided it based on the new agreement they'd made after Kurapika joined the team. The payout for each person was slightly less than originally expected, but no one cared. After all, the true reward wasn't money, it was the experience of fighting the strongest, and the fame of having taken down the Phantom Troop. Within hours, the news spread across the world. Kurapika, Leorio, and Boudreaux, being the only public faces of the team, became overnight celebrities in the hunter world. Boudreaux, in particular, was ecstatic. He ran a sizable martial arts school back in his city, and his newfound fame would skyrocket his business. He might even become the founder of an entirely new martial arts school, known across the world. After the bounty was settled, Tianming hosted a celebration banquet at the grandest hotel in York New City. The waiter was horrified when this gang of heavily bandaged weirdos came walking in. Gon was wrapped like a mummy, looking like he'd just crawled out of a tomb. Tianming quickly explained, "We're here to eat, not to eat people," which finally calmed the staff down enough to serve them. The banquet began. Tables were piled high with dishes of every kind. Tianming, Gon, Leorio, and the rest jumped onto the table, wolfing down food like they'd been starving for days. Killua and Huashidu long wanted to crawl under the table out of embarrassment. The waitress struggled to hold back her laughter. Killua wished he could wrap his entire face in bandages and pretend he wasn't part of the group. They spent a week relaxing in Yorknu. But all good things must come to an end. After 7 days, Kurapika quietly said goodbye. He still had a mission, to reclaim the scarlet eyes of his fallen Kurta clan. He couldn't let them remain in other people's collections. And more importantly, Maki was still alive. She had taken part in the massacre. Kurapika couldn't allow her to keep living. Though Maki wasn't the strongest member of the troop, she wasn't to be underestimated. Tianming warned Kurapika not to let his guard down again. He also shared what Krillou had said before dying: if Maki reformed the Phantom Troop and took on the role of leader, she might inherit Krillou's skill hunter ability. She'd become even more dangerous. If Kurapika underestimated her next time, he might not live through the encounter. By then, Gon's burns had healed enough that he didn't have to wear a full head wrap anymore. He looked at Kurapika and said solemnly, "If you ever need help, just call. We'll come right away." Kurapika nodded, then turned and walked away from Yorknu. Not long after, Boudreaux said goodbye as well. He needed to return to his martial arts school. It had exploded in popularity since his name had hit the news. If he didn't return soon, someone might challenge the school, and his disciples weren't ready to protect its reputation. What Tianming didn't expect was that Hua Shidulong wanted to leave with Boudreaux. The two had become fast friends over the past few days. Shidulong decided to work as a martial arts instructor at Boudreaux's school for a while, then travel the world to continue his training. After saying goodbye to them, Li Oreo also left quietly. He still had to finish his medical exams. Becoming a licensed doctor was his dream, and he wasn't going to abandon it. In the end, only Gon and Killua remained by Tianming's side. Tianming gave them each a Greed Island console, already loaded with more than 90 of the 100 designated cards collected by the Zezzer team. With this data, they were only a few steps away from clearing the game. These save files could help them avoid countless detours. But Gon rejected it. He insisted on using the memory card left by Jing. It was fine to trade for cards, but he didn't want to use something that had been earned by someone else's effort. Tianming didn't care either way. "Just let me know when you find Razor," he said. "That's all I need." Whether they cleared the game or not had nothing to do with him. He sent them off to enter Greed Island, then returned to his room and stood before a massive Hunter World map mounted on the wall. His gaze sharpened. And that's a wrap, hunters. Another amazing Hunter x Hunter fanfic completed. Massive shout out to the original author. Their links are in the description, so be sure to show them some love for this masterpiece. If you're new here and love HXH as much as I do, drop a like and consider hitting that sub button to officially become a hunter. Your support seriously keeps me going. It took me over 10 hours to translate and clean up 106 chapters of this fanfic so y'all could enjoy it, so yeah. Show some love. Don't forget to check the community posts. I'm always running polls, asking for feedback, and letting you vote on what I should do next. Also, this fanfic is still ongoing. So if you want another part, I will make one once there's another 25 chapters if the author keeps making it. If I forget about it after a couple months, and there are chapters available, just shout at me in the comments. That's it for now. Peace out.